Chapter 5:29. In the end, the reason was the latter. Su Yurong raised her head to look at Qin Chongqing and asked, "Why aren't you eating?" "Oh, I'm eating." Because of Tang 36's influence in the past 2 years, Qin Chongqing had become much more talkative, but in front of her he seemed to have returned to that honest young Taoist from Xining village. His words were extremely simple, his thoughts exceptionally pure, unable to conceal any of his emotions. For example, he was somewhat confused right now, so when he picked up the chopsticks he almost lost his grip. He stretched out his hand like the wind and caught the chopsticks in midair, but he pushed the yellow paper umbrella to the side. Thus, the quarrel that was still going on at the Kong table in front of them once again reached their ears. Last spring, when little Principal Chen first entered the capital, he suffered such humiliation in the divine general's estate. Afterwards, he was repeatedly suppressed. He was clearly extremely talented, his grades excellent, but he was forcibly removed from the enrollment list of all the schools. If not for His Holiness's secret protection, he probably wouldn't even have been able to enter the Orthodox Academy that had long since declined. All of you say that breaking off the engagement was a heartless act, but have you ever thought that if the Su family had not been so shameless, how could this marriage have become like this? What does this have to do with Miss Yurong? At the Ivy Festival, the White Crane returned north. In that letter, she had already acknowledged this engagement. Otherwise, how could just Qin Chongqing holding the marriage contract make the Southern diplomatic mission speechless? Even if Qin Chongqing holds a grudge against the divine general's estate, he has no reason to let Miss Yurong suffer such humiliation. Humph. Su Shiji had always been unwilling to acknowledge this marriage. The people of the divine general of the East's estate despise the poor and favor the rich. But now little Principal Chen is completely different, turning around and wanting to hug his thigh? Truly shameless to the extreme. All of you say that little Principal Chen breaking off the engagement is a humiliation? In my view, this is just the divine general of the East's estate humiliating itself. But in the end, this matter has nothing to do with the Holy Maiden. Why should she have to bear all these rumors? It can only be said that the Holy Maiden is unfortunate to be born in this sort of estate and to have such parents. The Kong table in the corner became very quiet. The meat juice in the iron pot gurgled. Qin Chongqing and Su Yurong sat on either side of the Kong. The atmosphere became heavy again. It had been almost 2 years since he came to the capital. That engagement had long since spread throughout the continent. The humiliation and suppression that the divine general of the East's estate had once given him, the change in attitude, and how he had transformed from a young Taoist priest from the countryside to the successor of the orthodoxy, were topics that everyone took delight in discussing. The battle on the bridge of helplessness this morning seemed to be the final conclusion of this story, or perhaps the conclusion. However, it was not truly able to end everything. On the contrary, it pushed people's interest in this story to a peak. Presumably, just like the diners at that table at this moment in the countless family banquets in the capital, everyone was presumably discussing this matter. He had never forgotten the humiliation he had received from the divine general's estate. He had also felt many emotions towards her when she was far away in the south. However, just as the guest had said, she had never truly harmed him in this matter. Yet, she now had to bear the ridicule and blame from the divine general's estate. This might be a little unfair. Qin Chongqing didn't know what to say. After all, they are my parents. Su Yurong's expression was very calm, as though she was not affected by those discussions. Her following words, however, took a sudden turn. "I want to drink some wine." "Okay." Qin Chongqing had the innkeeper bring out 2 small jars of the best wine. He opened the clay seal on one of the jars and filled her bowl to 70%. Su Yurong softly expressed her thanks and opened the other jar of wine. She filled his bowl to the brim and then looked at him. "Tell me." Qin Chongqing still didn't know what to say. After thinking it over, he looked at her beautiful face and hesitantly asked, "Face? Some sort of technique from South Stream Temple. Oh. After these two simple sentences, the Kong once more fell silent. Su Yurong raised her bowl of wine and took a small sip. It was only a small sip, but her face slightly reddened. Don't tell anyone that we met in the garden of Zhou. Why? When Chen Chongsheng had heard her request on the bridge of helplessness, he had not understood. Now that he had confirmed that she really did not want anyone else to know about this matter, he became even more confused. Su Yurong did not directly answer his question. She softly said, "Hasn't the engagement already been annulled?" This was a rumor that had been circulating in the capital for a very long time. It had never been acknowledged by the Tradition Academy or the Divine General of the East's estate. But as one of the parties involved in the engagement, she naturally knew that the rumor was not a rumor. It was something that had already happened. Chen Chongsheng did not speak for a very long time. When the snowy wind on the bridge blew away the white gauze and he saw her eyes, that was the happiest moment of his 16 years. Compared to when he memorized the last Taoist scripture in the old temple, found the faded star in the Tradition Academy, obtained first place on the first banner in the grand examination, and found Wang Ji's notebook in the pavilion of ascending mist, he was happier. So she was still alive. She was her. She was his fiancée. Was there anything more bizarre than this in the world? Was there anything better than this? When he was bathing in the small building of the Tradition Academy, he had already thought it over. He would go to the Li Palace and ask the Pope to repair the marriage contract. Then he would bring Tang 36 and the others directly to the Imperial Palace to find her. If she agreed, he would directly propose to her. He had never experienced love, but as long as he was sure that something was what he wanted to do, he would definitely do it with extreme seriousness and focus, seizing every minute. But now, she was saying that this matter could not be told to anyone. Then, how could he convince the Pope to rescind the decree annulling the engagement? A month ago, he had worked extremely hard to finally annul this engagement. Now he realized that he very much needed this engagement. Tang 36 was very right. I thought you were dead. Back then in the garden of Zhou, I promised you that I would annul this engagement, so he looked at Su Yurong and said somewhat helplessly, "Since you knew it was me, why didn't you tell me earlier?" Su Yurong's expression was slightly cold. "In the garden of Zhou, you lied to me. I was the one who discovered the truth, so why did I tell you?" Chen Chongsheng felt very innocent and asked, "When did I lie to you?" "Don't tell me you're called Su Sheng. You are also not Lady Chu Jian. Why didn't you admit that you were Chen Chongsheng? Back then, why didn't you say that you were Su Yurong?" They looked into each other's eyes and practically asked this question at the same time. Then they remembered that back then, in the snowy temple by the white grass path, when they announced their names for the first time, they also said two fake names at the same time. It was unknown what they were thinking at the time. Chen Chongsheng recalled his mood at the time. The main reason he didn't want her to know his identity was because he didn't want her to know that he had a world-famous fiancée. Perhaps Su Yurong also thought this way at the time and didn't want him to know that she had a world-famous fiancé. Is it very embarrassing to have a fiancé like me? He looked at Su Yurong and asked. He was somewhat serious, but also somewhat bitter and sad. After lying in bed for an entire day, the sky was dark. I said that I wouldn't say the reason for taking a day off. Today I didn't, so I said that my cold's a bit heavy. I wish everyone a happy holiday and good health. Chapter 530. Of course, that couldn't be the reason. Chen Chongsheng recalled the scene in the snowy temple and quickly rejected this question. He then thought of another important question. Su Yurong had said back then that she was called Qin Chu Jian. Her surname was Qin. Perhaps it was a bit wishful thinking, but he always felt that it was related to him, just like how he had told her back then that he was called Su Sheng. He asked no more questions because he realized that this matter truly was rather chaotic. If he continued to investigate the situation in the Garden of Zhou, he was afraid that he would develop some unpleasant feelings towards Su Yurong's fiancée. Would that also be tantamount to being jealous of him? This matter truly was rather chaotic and incomprehensible. One had been well versed in the Taoist canon since childhood and had all the principles at her fingertips, while the other had a tranquil Tao heart and had begun to study the heavenly tome monoliths at the age of 12. Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong were the cream of the crop, both geniuses of cultivation. However, when they had dealt with this matter in the garden of Zhou, they had been very flustered and had made many mistakes. Su Yurong didn't answer Qin Chongsheng's stupid question. The beef ribs in the iron pot were still gurgling. In the quiet morning, they looked at each other and knew why the two of them hid their identities at that time. They didn't miss the slightest change of emotions at that time. In the end, they were still smart children, just like those pure white snowflakes outside the restaurant. But there were still some matters that needed to be resolved, or else their hearts would always feel somewhat uncomfortable, such as that matter. You, Princess Luoluo, and the little black dragon. Su Yurong did not explain, but Qin Chongqing understood what she was asking. Back in the mausoleum of Zhou, she had once said that her fiancé was a womanizer, and the ones he provoked were all ignorant girls. Qin Chongqing suddenly remembered that he had once cursed her fiancé, truly a shameless scum. As it turned out, he had been cursing him. When he thought of this, his mood became rather complex. He had no idea what to say, so he could only sigh. Presumably, it was Lady Schwanger who said it? The truth that had only been revealed after half a year had dealt a massive blow to his mind. So much so that he had not noticed that besides Luoluo, Su Yurong had also mentioned the little black dragon. He somewhat helplessly explained, I think that the two of us now understand the principle that what the eyes see is not necessarily the truth. Perhaps, Su Yurong said softly. Then she raised her head and looked at him. A bright light suddenly flashed in her eyes. She raised her eyebrows slightly as she thought of something. As a result, the ethereal mountains and rivers in her picturesque beauty became vivid in an instant, and the brightness became sharp. I remember you said that your fiancé, Qin Chongqing's expression subtly changed. At the time in the mausoleum of Zhou, when he had described his fiancé to her, although he had not intentionally mocked or humiliated her, he had not said anything nice either. It was just that, didn't you say it yourself that it's better not to have this kind of woman? He couldn't help but argue. Su Yurong said, I was misled by your words. At that time, she had a very low evaluation of Su Shen's fiancé in her heart. She even felt that it was shameful. She was arrogant, stupid, had bad taste, and had moral problems. When she found out that all these comments were about her, she couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed and annoyed. At that time, the more critical her evaluation was, the more humiliated she became. Don't be fooled by her calm expression right now. Her small hands in the sleeves of her cotton-padded jacket had already clenched into fists. This matter was still very messy. Qin Chongqing looked at the wine in his bowl and sighed once more. When he was 10, a strange fragrance had enveloped the old temple. He had been silent for many days, and then he had sighed for many days. From then on, he had never sighed as much as he did today. Everything was a misunderstanding. The affairs of the world, encounters, were sometimes very coincidental, very inconceivable. There had always been so many grudges between the two of them, but in the end they had met in the garden of Zhou under a different identity and then spent so many days together. Fortunately, they had finally met again. Presumably, there would still be many things that would clarify these inexplicable and inexplicable matters. As long as they did not cause a lifelong misunderstanding, it was fine. Thinking of this, Qin Chongqing was no longer so worried. He looked at her and smiled. What are you smiling about? Su Yurong asked. Qin Chongqing replied, being happy. Su Yurong's gaze drooped, her eyelashes trembling. Suddenly, she covered her mouth with her hand and hiccuped. I drank too much, she explained with some embarrassment. The alcohol content of this wine was rather high. In a situation where she did not use her true essence to dissolve the alcohol, She had drunk several bowls in succession, so she truly should have been drunk. Otherwise, why would her beautiful face blush again? Chun Changxing asked with concern, "Are your wounds all right? Is drinking all right?" As he spoke, his gaze fell on the sleeve of her cotton jacket. Looking at the finger that had just poked out of the sleeve, he realized that there was no wound there. Then he remembered that she had once studied in the 13 divisions of Radiant Green and was now the holy maiden of South Stream Temple. Under the sacred light, there was no need for her to worry about such problems. Su Yurong glanced at him and said, "You really think that I can't beat you?" Chun Changxing thought to himself, "How did we get into this again?" Changing the subject, he said, "I have something important to tell you." Su Yurong lightly flicked her finger. With a gust of wind, the yellow paper umbrella slowly rolled back to its original position. There were now 2 more tables of guests in the restaurant than before, and it was even noisier. At this moment, the sounds from outside could no longer be heard, and occasional gazes would be blocked by that invisible wall. With the yellow paper umbrella and her and Chun Changxing's current cultivation levels, unless a powerful expert at the peak of star condensation came to personally eavesdrop, they would definitely be discovered. Do you still remember when we found a lot of gold, silver, and other treasures in those stone huts in the mausoleum of Zhou? Chun Changxing took the stainless sword from his waist and placed it next to the pot. Then he began to take things out from inside. This was Su Yurong's first time seeing this treasure of the orthodoxy at such a close distance. This was not the stainless sword, but the sheath called the vault sheath. She looked at it very seriously, very interested, so much so that she did not pay much attention to Chun Changxing's solemn words and casually gave a grunt of agreement. Before Nank brought the soul wood and drove the monster tide to surround the mausoleum, the soul pivot began to go crazy and broke many things. Those pills had already lost their effectiveness, so it doesn't matter if they're destroyed. It's just that those secret manuals are a bit of a pity. Oh, and then there's the jade and crystals. After they were crushed into powder, they weren't worth much. The gold was still all right. Later on, I asked someone to melt it into liquid gold and cast it into smaller pieces, so there wasn't too much damage. This is pearls. I heard that pearl powder can be used to make tea and can beautify one's appearance, so I won't divide it. In a while, you can take it all with you. Chun Changxing kept on taking things and talking nonstop. Su Yurong's attention was finally drawn over. Looking at the boxes by the stove, she asked, "What did you say?" "This is what we agreed on, that the things in the mausoleum of Zhou would be evenly divided." Chun Changxing looked at her and very seriously said, "If the pills could still be used, then when Senior Suli was injured, I probably would have used some. But as for the other things, I didn't get your consent, so I kept them all. It's just that for the sake of keeping them more convenient, I asked the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education to help me exchange them for silver notes and a few other things." He was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He had always believed that the treasures in the mausoleum of Zhou did not belong to him alone. Before he could confirm whether she was alive or dead, he had no right to use them. Thus, when Tang 36 had asked him for silver, he had not said that he had this wealth. And when he believed that she had already left this world, he had made a decision that was even more incomprehensible. This is the title deed. I asked Jean Yilu to exchange it for a large grassland in the lower reaches of the Red River. "Prepared to leave it for you," he said, pointing at a box. Startled, Su Yurong asked, "Why did you give this to me?" Chun Changxing replied, "At the time I thought that you might not be around anymore, so I had to leave something for your tribe. That grassland is the closest to your homeland." At the time he had always believed that she was a genius girl of the elf race, shouldering the heavy responsibility of reviving the elf race. Su Yurong understood, but said nothing. Chun Changxing misunderstood her silence and said somewhat embarrassedly, "Of course, now that I know that you have no use for this grassland, this matter was truly rather muddled. No, it's pretty good. I like it very much." Su Yurong took the box and looked at his face reflected in the steam from the pot, speaking very seriously. Back in the mausoleum of Zhou, he had not cared about those treasures or secret manuals at all. He had only been anxious to find medicine for her. At the time, she had been very moved. Now she was the same. I'll leave the other things with you for now. I didn't bring the Tong Palace today, so it's not convenient to carry it. She used a very natural tone to continue. When I need it, I'll come find you. This was a very good arrangement, and Chen Chongqing very much approved of it. However, he thought about how she was now the master of South Stream Temple and had countless places to spend money. So he said, I'll leave the other miscellaneous items with me for now, but you can take the pearl powder and the box of silver notes back with you. Su Yurong replied, They're all worldly possessions, so there's no need to care so much about them. Chen Chongqing could not understand this sort of otherworldly attitude towards life. He asked, Then what should we care about? How could she truly be otherworldly? It was just that compared to the flames of the mortal world, the vast sky of stars was even brighter and more dazzling. What we should care about is we are opponents, enemies. Su Yurong looked into his eyes and spoke. Her voice was very calm, but the emotions in her eyes were rather complex. The starlight in their deepest depths faintly trembled. It was beautiful, yet it also made one feel somewhat uneasy. Yes, regardless of whether the two of them had that engagement or not, they were now destined to be opponents, and in the future they might even become mortal enemies. The division between the north and the south of the orthodoxy, the struggle between the old and the new, the divine empress and the pope's differing views of the world. The three most important contradictions of the human world now rested on the shoulders of the two of them. Above and below the balcony and the poisoned dagger, the lonely grave on the yellow sands and the bleak cold of the butterfly, no matter how one looked at it, the story of Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong would ultimately develop in that direction. It could be sorrowful, it could be tragic, it could become a love story passed down through the ages. In short, this matter was very worrying. He and she were still so young, and their shoulders were still rather thin and weak. How could they carry so much weight? But the two of them seemed to have no such awareness. They had just fought on the bridge of helplessness, and then they sat down together to drink wine and eat bones, especially Chen Chongqing. It was like he was completely unaware of the current situation, as if he had forgotten all the difficulties and dangers that lay between the two of them, because I forgot, he somewhat embarrassedly said. I've changed the last sentence of the previous chapter a little, changing the description of the final mood to serious. I feel that this would be a little more accurate. The love and mood swings of young people should be greater, but in the end, Chin Su is not an ordinary person. As for the problem of the treasures in the mausoleum of Zhou, I told everyone that I would think of a way to get them back. This chapter has mentioned it, and it fits the tone of the story of choosing the heavens. Of course, it can't stand up to too much scrutiny, because after leaving the Garden of Zhou, I really did forget to write about it. I've admitted it, and I'm sorry again. The next chapter will come out rather quickly. Chapter 531. This was a very speechless answer. Just like Tang 36 said, Chen Chongqing and Su Yurong were two people that made people speechless. Perhaps because of this, after Su Yurong heard Chen Chongqing's answer, she wasn't too surprised, nor was she angry, but rather satisfied. He only remembered that after dusk he would come to Fortune Peace Road to eat fish with tofu, though in the end he only ate beef ribs. He only remembered the words he had said in the mausoleum of Zhou, so he had divided the gold and silver into two piles and used the majority of it to exchange for the plain downstream of the Red River. Though she had no relationship with the elf race, he only remembered that he had promised her to end the engagement, so he had not hesitated to be criticized by the people of the capital to ask His Holiness the Emperor to forcefully end the engagement. Though this matter now seemed very foolish, and he was in a rush to find that marriage contract, it was not important to get some things wrong, and it was not important to forget some things. It was fine as long as he remembered some things. Because of Chen Chongqing's answer and the fragrant beef ribs in the iron pot, Su Rong didn't regret her action of handing over the slip of paper on the bridge of helplessness. She said softly, "I ate very well, thank you." After saying this, she stood up and put away the plane. She picked up the yellow paper umbrella from the ground and walked out of the store. Qin Changsheng was slightly startled, seeing her lift the curtain and walk out. He suddenly remembered that he forgot to give her the most important thing. He hurriedly chased after her. The cold wind blew against his face, and snowflakes floated on the street at night. How could he still see her figure? He looked at the string of beads made of 10 stones on his wrist and thought to himself, "I can't forget such an important thing next time." The shop owner's voice came from the side. "Sir, there's still half a pot of beef ribs left. Do you want to take it away or eat a little longer?" Qin Changsheng turned around and saw that the shopkeeper's expression was a bit uneasy. After a moment of hesitation, he realized that the shopkeeper was worried that Qin Changsheng would go back on his word. The shopkeeper rubbed his hands and looked at him nervously. Carrying the packed beef ribs, Qin Changsheng returned to the Tradition Academy. The winter forest by the lake seemed a little sinister in the night. Fortunately, the snow on the branches diluted the feeling. From the depths of the forest came a low, thunderous sound. Occasionally, a few extremely thin, lightning-like streaks of light would float out. That was Xianyuan cultivating. Su Mou was in the library giving guidance to the new students. Zhexiu, whose injuries were gradually healing, was under some pile of snow, grinding his spirit and willpower. Only Tang 36 had not gone anywhere, nor was he in his own room, but was waiting for him in Qin Changsheng's room. Not only because he was very curious about Qin Changsheng's whereabouts, nor was he in his own room, but also because he wanted to, but also because Chen, but because he you, Chen, and because he had. Because if and because and because and Chin and if and Chong yang one and Chen Changyang and Chen the Chong Chen and Chong and he. Tang 36 had already sat in his room for a very long time, thinking about that embarrassing scene in the Li Palace, thinking about those gazes that were like real swords. Even now, he still felt that his back was somewhat sore, and thinking about where Qin Changsheng was enjoying himself, his mood was getting worse and worse. So when Qin Changsheng returned to his room, what he saw was, of course, a very ugly face. For some reason, perhaps because he was hiding the truth, Qin Changsheng felt uneasy when he saw his face. He placed the lunchbox on the table and pretended not to see Tang 36 sitting on his bed. He pretended that he had no misophobia and very carefully said, "The beef ribs of Fortune Peace Road taste pretty good. His Holiness the Pope's divine staff tastes even better." No matter how ugly Tang 36's face was, it couldn't be any uglier, but the anger represented by his deliberate indifference was very easy to see. Qin Changsheng took over the godly staff and was very surprised. Although Tang 36 had predicted this beforehand and warned him, he still didn't expect it. Tang 36 looked at him and coldly said, "You don't intend to explain?" Qin Changsheng looked at him and said, "I just arranged to have a meal with someone. It's nothing major." "But you still can't say it?" "Yes." "Then, who did you have a meal with?" "I also can't say." Qin Changsheng was rather nervous, but when he thought about how he had sat across from Su Rong and drank wine, he couldn't help but perk up the corners of his lips. Seeing this, Tang 36 sucked in a breath of cold air and said, "A woman." Qin Changsheng was very shocked and asked, "How did you see?" Tang 36 sneered, "Look at your face full of spring breeze and your 7 emotions. Only Xianyuan wouldn't be able to see it." Qin Changsheng was rather embarrassed and didn't know how to respond. 3 days. 3 days at most. Tang 36 clenched his teeth and said, "I'll definitely be able to find out what's going on with you. You clearly just met Su Rong, but you weren't captivated by her and instead went to meet with another girl. I'm really curious to see just how good that girl is. Chen Chongsheng was rather confused and also faintly unconvinced. He asked, "Why can't I meet with Su Yurong?" Tang, 36, expressionlessly said, "Su Yurong will meet with you in private? Why don't you just tell me that you are Su Li's illegitimate child?" Qin Chongsheng thought about it and said, "If that's the case, then wouldn't Zheshio have to call me brother-in-law?" Tang, 36, heard this and laughed. Then he thought of something and his smile disappeared. He looked at Chen Chongsheng and said, "You actually learned to tell jokes, and it's really funny. You're really done for." Qin Chongsheng didn't understand and asked, "What?" Tang, 36, looked at him sympathetically and said, "It seems that you really like that girl, or else your personality wouldn't have changed so much. What will you do in the future?" Qin Chongsheng laid on the bed, tossing and turning. Even when it was late at night, he still couldn't fall asleep. After the age of 10, other than the time when he first entered the capital to absorb starlight and purify, this was the first time he had insomnia. Tang, 36's final words seemed to tear open the paper window, allowing the starlight to fall upon the snowy plains in his body, clearly illuminating all his thoughts. In the half-year since he left the garden of Zhou, he would often think of her, whether it was on the great banyan tree by the lake or among the boulders of the mausoleum of Zhou. But what he did not understand was that kind of longing was longing for longing. Until today, when the white gauze fell from the bridge of helplessness and he saw her eyes, especially when he saw her in the small tavern, wrapped in a large cotton-padded jacket, taking small sips of wine and gnawing on a bone. Her appearance was different from the garden of Zhou, different from the legends, but it was incomparably real, so beautiful that it made one want to get close to her. As a result, this longing fell into reality, taking on real weight. Longing that was real and had weight was called lovesickness. Once it was lovesickness, it was naturally difficult to sleep. Qin Chongsheng was a person who was slow in speech but quick in action. In any case, he couldn't sleep. Since he wanted to see her, he would go see her. Su Yurong had said to him that he could not let anyone know that they had known each other, so he could not go see her through normal channels. So he could only go see her in secret. He got up, put on his clothes, and floated out the window. Crossing the winter forest, he took out a key and opened the secret door on the palace wall that was well concealed by ivy. He walked in. He pushed the heavy door open a crack and gazed at the palace in the darkness. He was somewhat nervous, so nervous that the whistle he blew out was somewhat hoarse. He was a very well-behaved youth and very rarely did this sort of thing. Although he had secretly entered the imperial palace several times, the current situation was somewhat different from before. Last night, the Pope had officially announced to the entire continent that he was the successor to the orthodoxy, but now he was intruding into the imperial palace. If he was discovered, then it would truly be a major incident. The wind and snow slowly drifted through the air. The red walls and yellow eaves of the imperial palace were all painted white. The divine queen glanced at the snowflakes outside the window, and a mocking smile appeared on her lips. She said, "Do you know when people are the most daring?" The confluence of the north and south was right in front of them. Various matters suddenly increased. And Mo Yu was still accompanying the queen to deal with matters late into the night. She was already somewhat tired. Suddenly hearing this question, she froze for a moment before responding. She softly said, "When facing death." "It's not wrong, but there's another situation because of love." The divine queen looked at the dark palace outside the window and said, "Or perhaps because of lust." Snow danced in the sky and lights flowed. The imperial palace seemed like it was daytime, not night, so black objects were rather conspicuous. When Chen Chongsheng saw the black goat slowly walk over from the snow-covered plaza, he felt a sense of gratefulness. He told the black goat why he had come. The black goat glanced at him, turned around, and walked away. After some time, it raised its horn at a palace in front of it, then turned around and disappeared into the snowy night. The location of that palace was excellent. It was not very remote, but it was very quiet. Moreover, In the middle of winter, there were many green trees around the palace. It was very unusual. She was living here. It seemed that the rumors were true. The divine queen doted on her, even more than the princess of Ping. Then, if the orthodoxy and the imperial court split in the future, and the pope and the divine queen fought, she would definitely help the queen. What should I do? Suddenly, he remembered the words she said in the tavern. He realized that this was indeed a problem. He could forget it for a while, but he could not think about it forever. The wind and snow in front of the palace were a bit cold. At the beginning, his face was a bit hot, but now it gradually cooled down. It wasn't that his heart was cold, but that he needed to be calm. He came to see her, but he didn't move for a long time. He didn't have any intention of sneaking into the palace. He just stood there. After an unknown amount of time, a voice reached his ears. It was her voice. Why are you standing here? He looked towards the source of the voice and saw that there was a window on the east side of the palace that was still lit. He walked over and saw her silhouette reflected by the light. She sat at the table in front of the window, holding a book in her hand. It was late at night, but she still hadn't slept. For some reason, perhaps it was the same reason he hadn't been able to sleep. I wanted to see you, he said to her through the window. Su Yurong softly said from the window, Didn't we just meet? Chen Changsheng hesitated for a while, then said, But I can't sleep. Su Yurong turned to look out the window, somewhat uneasy. She thought to herself, just what could have happened to make a person like him unable to sleep? It must be known that in the garden of Zhou, even if there were countless terrifying beasts hiding in the sea of grass around him, he could still very calmly enter the land of dreams. What happened? Nothing. It's just that I can't sleep thinking about you. Tonight, Su Yurong's name was in Hong. Chapter 532. Su Yurong stood by the window, listening to these words. She stared blankly for a very long time, not knowing what to say. In the plains of the unsetting sun, they had gone through life and death together, stood shoulder to shoulder, relied on each other, and even brushed off the snow. They had long since understood each other's intentions, but at the time, she did not know that he was that young Taoist boy from Xining village. After leaving the garden of Zhou, she had also thought about her promise to him and prepared to break off the engagement. However, the Li Palace had announced to the world that the sword pool had reappeared and many people had seen those swords. After comparing them several times, she finally confirmed that he was him. Only then did she realize that fate toyed with people, playing such a joke on her. But what did this count for? As long as he was still him, it was fine. She clearly understood what she wanted. On the bridge of helplessness and by the beef rib pot, she had always been waiting for him to say something, but he had never said anything. It was already late at night when he inexplicably came to the window and said these inexplicable words. Fine, this truly was very similar to his path of the sword, just like Wang Po's path of the blade, very straight. He had directly used these words to pierce through the paper window in front of her, bringing the situation back to before the divine path of the mausoleum of Zhou. Su Yurong stood up, looked at his figure through the window, and then pushed open the window. Snowflakes were swept in by the wind and fell on her face a little cold. The earth dragons are burning too fiercely, so the room is a little hot. She looked at Chen Changxing as if explaining why she had pushed open the window to meet with him. But not even she realized that this explanation was actually very cute. Chen Changxing looked at her face. He did not notice the nervousness in this explanation and the cuteness that came with it, but he felt that she was very cute. When I was standing outside just now, I also felt a little hot, he very honestly said. It was currently the middle of winter. In the dead of night, the world was frozen and snowflakes danced in the air. How long have you been standing there? Su Yurong asked as she looked at the snow on his body. Chen Changxing thought it over, then shook his head. I forgot. Su Yurong asked, Why didn't you just come in? Chen Changxing replied, I was afraid of disturbing your rest, and also, Schwanger should be here. I was worried that she would see and say something. Yurong asked. Then do you want to come in now? Chun Changxing said, No need, I came. Actually, because I have something to give you. After saying this, he took off the string of stone beads on his wrist and very carefully broke it. Then he put his palm through the window and said, There are 10 of them. You choose 5. In truth, he had long forgotten whether or not he had reached some sort of agreement with her regarding the distribution of the treasures in the mausoleum of Zhou. However, he believed that since they had found the mausoleum of Zhou together, everything discovered in the mausoleum of Zhou should be divided in half, whether it was the having blade style or the 10 stone pearls. This is... Su Yorong's curious voice suddenly stopped, raising her head to look at him. She said in disbelief, This is the 10 beside the mausoleum of Zhou. If it were any other cultivator, even a prefect of the orthodoxy like Ling Haizhiwang, they would find it impossible to see anything wrong with these ordinary and unremarkable stone pearls, as these stone pearls truly did not give off any ripples of qi. However, she had begun comprehending the heavenly tone monoliths when she was 10-some years old, and she had even personally seen these heavenly tone monoliths in the garden of Zhou, so she could naturally sense that something was different. Yes. Chun Changsheng looked at her and said, The garden of Zhou has not disappeared. If you want to go back and take a look, I can take you in. He did not use the phrase, enter the garden of Zhou, but go back, because to him and her, the garden of Zhou was truly far too important. Upon hearing that the garden of Zhou had not collapsed and that he could still enter it as he pleased, Su Yorong was even more shocked. But the truly important thing was still the stone pearls in his palm. She looked at him and seriously asked, You really want to give them to me? Chun Changsheng looked back at her and seriously said, Without you, I would have died long ago. How could I have found the mausoleum of Zhou, let alone the sword pool and these things? Su Yurong thought it over, but did not carefully choose. She took 5 stone pearls from his palm and immediately placed them in the Tong Palace. She felt that Chun Changsheng's words were reasonable, so she very calmly accepted them. She seemed especially carefree and unperturbed, as if it was only right and proper and upright. What Chun Changsheng most admired and liked about her was precisely this sort of temperament. Then I'll be leaving. In the snowy night he entered the palace, the window was pushed open, he saw her, and he even gave her the stone pearls. Everything that needed to be done had been done, so he naturally had to embark on his return journey. As the saying goes, one comes in high spirits and returns when one's spirits are exhausted. A distinguished scholar's style could not be better than this, but he was a youth, not a distinguished scholar, so even though he said he was leaving, his feet did not move. Su Yurong said, Go back first. Chun Changxing grunted, but his feet still did not move. He only looked at her. She slightly turned around, as if she wanted to avoid his gaze, but in reality, she was sticking her head out the window. As she got closer and closer, he became somewhat nervous. She reached out and brushed the snow off his shoulders, just like how she had brushed away the fallen leaves for him on the Divine Avenue. It was very relaxed, very calm, very familiar, very peaceful. The paper window had long since been pierced through, and the window had been pushed open. It just needed a final confirmation. The action of brushing away the snow was confirmation. Chun Changsheng felt like his severed meridians were automatically mending themselves, his entire body brimming with the strength of life. He looked at her, his eyes glowing. Su Yurong did not meet his gaze. She looked towards a certain place in the snowy night. She still felt that her face was somewhat hot, so she softly said, Tomorrow I want to go to the Orthodox Academy to take a look. Chun Changsheng no longer hesitated. He turned around and walked into the snowy night. He was very sure that this time he would definitely be able to fall asleep. At 5 a.m, Chun Changsheng woke up. He took 5 breaths to calm his mind, then opened his eyes. He washed and dressed, then went to run by the lake. Calculating carefully, he had not even slept for 4 hours. Strangely, his spirit was very good. He did not have the usual dark circles on Tang 36's face, and his feet seemed to move like the wind. As time passed, More and more students came to run by the lake, but none of them were faster than him. From time to time, he would surpass them, and when the students saw that it was him, they hurriedly bowed. No matter how young he was still the principal, not to mention that he had confirmed his status as a candidate for Pope last night, so the students were even more respectful than usual. But he could not see the difference. He was even more patient and calm than usual, and he returned the bow. The breakfast in the small dining hall across the lake was golden millet porridge, but he could not tell the difference between it and normal millet porridge. Even when Xian Yuan took the mountain sea sword from the pile of firewood and flaunted it in front of him, saying that when he was cultivating last night, he had succeeded in drawing lightning to sharpen the sword. Qin Changsheng still could not tell the difference between the mountain sea sword and when he first left the sword pool in the garden of Zhou. In short, he was somewhat absent-minded, and his gaze would occasionally drift in the direction of the imperial palace. "Are you sick?" Tang, 36, yawned and asked him. Qin Changxing returned to his senses and looked at the 2 dark circles under his eyes. "I think you might be sick." Tang, 36, angrily thought, "If I hadn't stared at you last night like I'm sick and ended up falling asleep in the snow because I was too tired, I wouldn't be in such a bad state." Qin Changsheng looked in the direction of the imperial palace because last night she said she would come, and he was waiting for her. He naturally wanted to share the story between him and Su Yurong with others, especially with his friends. Tang 36 was originally the best person to talk to, but Su Yurong had said that she did not want others to know, so he could only endure. After eating breakfast, he once again washed his face and rinsed his mouth, changed into a set of clean clothes, and then stood in front of the window waiting. It was also because he was usually so particular about cleanliness that he did not attract the attention of the people of the Orthodox Academy. After some time, the cry of a crane came from the distance. He followed the cry of the crane, and in a short while in the depths of the forest he saw the white crane, as well as her riding it. Su Yurong was still wearing the large cotton-padded jacket from yesterday. It was not rustic at all, and just looking at it made one feel warm. It was probably because she did not want others to see her. So just like in the Garden of Zhou, she used the secret technique of South Stream Temple to make her appearance much more ordinary. Seeing her ordinary face, Qin Changsheng was not disappointed. On the contrary, he felt it to be even more intimate. Perhaps it was this intimacy that allowed him to find that feeling of casual conversation he had in the Garden of Zhou. He looked at the large cotton-padded jacket that made her seem especially cute, and after a moment of hesitation, he gathered up his courage and said a few words. "The smell of beef ribs is very strong. Do you want to change into a new set of clothes, or maybe wear mine first, and I'll wash this for you?" Su Yurong froze, and then she truly became angry and embarrassed. She turned around and walked towards the white crane. Qin Changsheng came to his senses and felt that his actions were truly absurd. He hurriedly chased after her, then began to make gestures with his hands at the white crane. He and the white crane were old friends. Without waiting for Su Yurong to get close, it let out a cry and flew away. Su Yurong stood in the snow, stunned once more. Starting from 2 years ago, she could not understand why the white crane was so intimate with Qin Changsheng and why it was so kind. "Just what did you do to it back then?" She looked at Qin Changsheng and asked, "Why is it so obedient to you?" This was the first time the 2 of them had discussed matters of their childhood. "When I was little, I mentioned it to you in letters, but you forgot." When Qin Changsheng thought of this matter, he felt rather uncomfortable. But then he thought of that matter from before, and all that discomfort transformed into unease. He said, "I misspoke just now, don't be angry. Just think about Tang's words." The words he mentioned were naturally Tang 36's words that he was a pig. The white crane left and did not return. The snowy forest was deserted and empty. Snowflakes slowly drifted down. Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong held up umbrellas as they walked through the secluded forest of the Orthodox Academy. "Zhixiu and I live here," Qin Changxing brought her to the edge of the forest and pointed at the nearby small building. Only after he said these words did he remember that she had come to the Orthodox Academy that night. She might even have seen the scene in the restaurant across the street. He explained, don't misunderstand. That day it was Tang Tang who insisted on dragging me, and Su Mou over. Su Mou used to be a student of the Li Palace Academy, 33rd on the proclamation of Azure Sky. You might have heard of him. Right now he's with us. These words were very natural and also naturally carried the pride of a young man. It was like he was bragging about his achievements to her. Just then, a voice suddenly rose up from the winter forest. I knew there was something wrong with you. No wonder that night you didn't even dare to touch the hand of the girl in your embrace. It turns out you really did have a lover. A pile of snow suddenly parted from where the voice had come from, and Tang, 36, stood up. The next chapter will be at night. The exact time is unknown. Chapter 533. Tang, 36's body was covered in snow. His face was pale, and his dark circles were extremely heavy. He looked extremely tired. In the past 2 days, in order to uncover Chen Changsheng's secret, he had racked his brains, forgetting to eat and sleep. He had truly put in a lot of effort, even using 2 of the magical artifacts of the Wen Shui Tang clan, before finally being able to perfectly conceal his aura and catch Chen Changsheng in the act. Ha ha ha! His proud laughter echoed in the winter forest. Then he walked in front of Chen Changsheng and stopped laughing. He said angrily, Aren't you a bit too much? Why do you keep saying bad things about me to show off your nobility? I heard you mention my name a few times in the snow, and none of it was nice. This umbrella is a bit weird. Tang, 36's gaze moved down from the umbrella and looked at the couple. Once again, he became proud and laughed. You haven't even solved the marriage yet, and you're already in the mood to walk in the snow with an umbrella. You have to know that the phoenix is very proud. If she knew that you found a girl, then he was prepared to use this to threaten Chen Changsheng and make him sign a series of unequal agreements. But when his gaze fell on the girl under the umbrella, he subconsciously stopped talking. He didn't know why. Even though he had never seen this girl before, he felt she was familiar. The snow forest became strangely quiet. Tang, 36, looked at the girl, and his expression became more and more serious. The young girl was about 15 or 16 years old, in the prime of her youth. Her brows were delicate and ordinary. The cotton jacket she wore seemed ordinary, but it was actually the most expensive 13 silk cotton. Her eyebrows were like willow leaves, and it was obvious that she used the most extravagant Qi Lixiang eyebrow pencil. Even the hairpin that seemed to be casually inserted in her hair, if he wasn't wrong, was more expensive than all the clothes and shoes Chen Changxing had worn in his entire life combined. Of course, what caught his attention the most was the young girl's eyes. He originally wanted to mock Chen Changsheng's taste, but now he realized that the girl's taste and temperament were impeccable. Of course, the girl's taste and temperament and the nobility hidden in the details could only be seen by a noble young master like him. A young Taoist priest from the countryside like Chen Changxing wouldn't be able to see through it no matter what. As the saying goes, casting pearls before swine. Who was this girl? Tang, 36, thought about his distant relatives, his cousins, and the young ladies of all the noble families on the continent, but he couldn't find an answer. He suddenly felt a strong sense of unease and vigilance. He didn't know where Chen Changxing got to know such a noble woman. He was worried that Chen Changsheng would be deceived. May I ask for Mrs. Tang, 36, looked at her and asked coldly. However, before he could finish a sentence, he was interrupted by a sudden burp. He looked at the girl with a shocked expression on his face. He clutched his chest as if he was choking. He remembered hearing the cry of a crane in the snow and Chen Changsheng explaining to her what happened that night. Then he thought of a possibility which he had denied the night before, in a mocking tone of voice and with the utmost certainty. You. He looked at her and opened his mouth wide. He couldn't say anything for a while and could only turn around to look at Qin Changsheng and ask, "Her?" Qin Changsheng nodded. Tang 36's body stiffened. He looked at Su Yurong again, his eyes full of shock. Qin Changsheng was also very shocked. He didn't think that this guy would spend so much effort to discover his secret. He was a little worried about Su Yurong's current mood. He looked at her and explained, this guy, Tang, you can also call me Tang 36. Unexpectedly, Tang 36 quickly calmed down and very naturally bowed to Su Yurong. However, there was a slight pause in the middle of his speech. That was because he was still choking. It was the sound of a burp. Su Yurong knew that this young master of the Wenshui Tang family was Qin Changsheng's best friend, the current director of the Orthodox Academy, and also the new owner of Clear Lake Restaurant. Tang 36 solemnly said, "Greetings to the Holy Maiden." Su Yurong softly said, "No need to be so polite." Tang 36 said, "It's said that when the Holy Maiden was in the capital, her favorite food was the blue lobster from Clear Lake Restaurant." Su Yurong calmly looked at him, a smile hidden in her eyes. She seemed to have guessed what would happen next. As expected, Tang 36 immediately said, "In a little while, I will send someone to deliver the blue lobster to the Divine General's estate. After you return to Holy Maiden Peak, I will have Clear Lake Restaurant directly transport it from the seaside. All year round, I guarantee an uninterrupted supply." Su Yurong said, "I will have to trouble young Master Tang." Tang 36 waved his hand and said, "We're all people, there's no need to be polite." His expression was very natural, free and at ease, and his heroic spirit reached the clouds. However, when he spoke, the burps never stopped. Speaking of which, this was also something very admirable. Even while burping incessantly, he was still able to so calmly finish this conversation. Qin Changsheng watched from the side, thinking, is this probably the benefit of having a thick skin? Su Yurong said to him, "We'll talk some other day." Tang 36's smile faded, and he said, "Holy Maiden, please go ahead." Qin Changsheng raised his umbrella and covered Su Yurong's head, then walked towards another part of the winter forest. When he walked past Tang 36, the two glanced at each other. There were countless hints of questioning and warning in their eyes. "Don't tell anyone about this. Don't worry, who am I?" Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong walked dozens of yards in the falling snow. Tang 36 was still smiling and waving his hand, maintaining the posture of saying goodbye. No matter if it was the curve of his lips or the width of his hand, they were all perfect, perfectly displaying the etiquette and knowledge of a noble young master. Su Yurong said softly, "This friend of yours is really a wonderful person." Qin Changsheng thought, where did this come from? Perhaps it was inexplicably wonderful. Tang 36 watched the figures of the two disappear into the depths of the snow forest. When he could no longer see them, he let out a sigh of relief. With some difficulty, he walked in front of a large tree and extended his hand to support it. Then he began to burp incessantly. The frequency of his burps was much higher than when he spoke before. After a while, he truly calmed down, and his shocked emotions began to truly ferment. He let out a strange cry, hugged the tree in front of him, and began to complain about Qin Changsheng and himself. At this moment, Xian Yuan finished his morning exercise and walked out from the depths of the forest. He happened to see Tang 36 hugging the tree like a madman and couldn't help but be surprised. "Didn't you always say that I was very childish when I hit trees? Why did you come up with a tree trunk today?" Tang 36 hugged the tree and didn't want to let go. He whimpered. Today was too embarrassing. What's wrong with doing one more embarrassing thing? Actually, Qin Changsheng never understood what the name Su Yurong meant to the young men of the world. Although because of the marriage certificate and the friendship between Tang 36 and Qin Changsheng, Tang 36 didn't fall in love with Su Yurong like most of the young men in the world, such as the Demon King's son, but she was still Su Yurong. And what did he do? Like a naughty child, he hid in the snow and eavesdropped on other people's conversation. He talked bad about her behind her back. He didn't even have time to wash his face when he woke up in the morning. He didn't brush his teeth either. The dark circles under his eyes were so heavy. He had never felt so embarrassed in his life. He wanted to hug the tree and never let go. Suddenly, Tang 36 turned around and looked at Xian Yuan Pa. They just met for the first time yesterday. How come they are traveling together today? And looking at them, although they purposely kept a fist's distance between their shoulders, there's something wrong with this purposeness. As he spoke, he stretched out his right hand and clenched it into a fist. He gestured in front of Xian Yuan Pa and sneered, "What a pair of adulterers! Do you think you can hide from my eyes by pretending to be calm? Who do you think I am? Can't I see that you two are in love?" Xian Yuan Pa didn't even know what happened. He felt that Tang 36 was very strange and said, "Are you crazy?" If it was a normal day, Tang 36 wouldn't let it go after hearing such a sincere comment. But right now, all his thoughts were on the young man and woman who just left. He looked at Xian Yuan Pa and asked seriously, "Do you believe in love at first sight?" Xian Yuan Pa said, "In the tribe, people usually get married after the first meeting. Does this count?" Tang 36 was speechless and asked back, "Do you think it counts?" Xian Yuan Pa thought seriously and said, "Uncertainly, I think. It should count." Tang 36 thought that this person was really hard to talk to. He left the forest and went to the little building. He pushed open the door and asked directly, "Do you believe in love at first sight?" Chapter 534. At this moment, Jeshio was standing by the window, pretending to be lonely, thinking of a certain person. When he suddenly heard these words, he stared blankly for a moment, then very naturally thought of many things back in the grand examination, in that bitter battle in the Tower of Purging Dust. When his hand had attacked his opponent's abdomen, his opponent's face had revealed an expression of shame and anger. In addition, after living under the same roof in the Mausoleum of Books, he had vaguely guessed at something, but he did not dare to believe it. Later on, when he met Xiang Ji in the Garden of Zhou, he carried her on his back and ran towards the sunset. As he thought about this, his lips curled up into a warm smile. Tang 36 didn't expect to see this kind of emotion on the face of the wolf tribe youngster who was famous for being cruel and ruthless. He couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. He held his forehead and thought, "What's wrong with this world?" Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng actually started dating, and Jishio was actually thinking about love. Tang Tang looks like someone. Senior, Su Li. Chen Changsheng very naturally gave an accurate answer. He looked at Su Yurong and smiled. At this time they had already left the Orthodox Academy and arrived at the 100 Flowers Lane outside the academy. Snow was falling from the sky, and they held up the yellow paper umbrella, making it very difficult for others to see them. Actually, from the moment they met yesterday on Fortune Peace Road, Chen Changsheng had wanted to ask, why was the yellow paper umbrella in her hands? It had to be known that this umbrella was his. However, no matter how ignorant he was, he knew that he couldn't ask such a question when he had already made a mistake, so he could only endure and not say it. Holding umbrellas, they walked through the wind and snow along the eastern shore of the Luo River. Passing through 8 Willows Lane, they arrived at the Bridge of Helplessness, and they very naturally recalled yesterday's battle. If I had known that my opponent was you at that time, perhaps the result would have been different? Standing in the middle of the snow bridge, Chen Changsheng looked at the direction she came from yesterday and asked softly. Su Yurong said, "From the very beginning, you never thought of winning." Chen Changsheng was silent for a while and said, "Because of the annulment of the engagement, I always feel like I'm being unfair to you." Su Yurong smiled and did not say anything. "Your cultivation level is higher than mine. It's already hard for me to win. Also, I don't like being ordered around." Chen Changxing turned around and looked at the distant Li Palace that was covered in snow. On that spring day, almost 2 years ago, when he left the divine general of the East's estate in humiliation. He had a similar feeling on another small bridge. He cultivated to follow his heart. His fate was not good, so he wanted to grasp it in his own hands. No one likes the feeling of fate being arranged. Su Yurong gazed at the imperial palace in the other direction of the snow. But I really did want to fight you yesterday because I wanted to know what level your sword has reached. Also, I wanted to win against you fair and square. I don't like the feeling of losing. Last night, in the beef bone shop on Fortune Peace Road, she had said something similar, but today she said it more seriously, more openly, without any pretense. The two of them walked down the snowy bridge. When it was snowing, there were not many people on the bridge. Only a stall selling candied haws was surrounded by some people. It seemed a little lively. Most of the people were idlers in the capital who had nothing to do. At this time, they were still discussing the battle from the day before and gossiping. For example, engagement, leniency, affection, heartlessness, and even more outrageous teasing. Those idlers had no idea that the two sides of the battle they were discussing were right next to them. Su Yurong slightly lowered her head. Qin Changsheng slightly raised his head. They once again walked across the snowy bridge, but this time they were no longer opponents. What was that? The snow gradually grew heavier. Although it could not be considered violent, it gradually blinded the eyes. There were fewer and fewer people on the streets. The snow on the eaves and the edges of the wells grew thicker and thicker. The streets of the capital became a vast expanse of white. The exposed colors of the buildings were like clean lines on white paper, very beautiful. The snow on the stone pillars of the Li Palace was like a slender stone man wearing a white hat. The mausoleum of books was still lush and green, but the divine path was covered in snow, like a frozen waterfall. No one came to disturb the small courtyard of the Plum Garden Inn. It was very quiet. Seeing the snow that was like a blanket, one could not bear to step on it. So they stood on the veranda and looked at the tree in the center of the courtyard. They talked about the excitement they felt when they came here 2 years ago to look at the rubbings of the heavenly tone monoliths and about the bamboo dragonfly. Qin Changxing and Su Yurong used an entire day to walk around the capital. They went to many places and talked about many things. For the majority of the time, it was him who was not good with words who did the talking. He introduced her to where this place was the solitude of the pavilion of ascending mist, the night pearls of the dew platform. He very earnestly acted as a tour guide, wanting to make her play a little happier. Su Yurong quietly listened on the side, a smile at the corner of her lips. Whether it was the mausoleum of books or the imperial palace, there were places she had grown tired of playing in since she was a child. The stone pillars of the Li Palace had even been her slide when she was a child. She did not need a youth who had grown up in Xining Village to explain these things to her. Qin Changxing had originally known about these things, but he had forgotten. She knew that he had definitely forgotten, but she did not want to remind him. At dusk, they finally returned to 100 Flowers Lane. Outside the walls of the rear courtyard of the Orthodox Academy, Qin Changsheng wanted to give the yellow paper umbrella to her, but she shook her head. "Martial uncle, Su wanted me to give this umbrella to you." Qin Changsheng was very happy. He thought to himself, I and Senior Su Li have argued over this matter for tens of thousands of li. Now it seems that Senior has finally recognized his mistake. He sent his spiritual sense into the handle of the umbrella and suddenly realized a problem. In shock, he asked, "Where's the sword in the umbrella?" The foundation of the yellow paper umbrella was the only sword in the past 1,000 years that had broken out of the sword pool and returned to the world of mortals. The heaven-shrouding sword whose name had shaken the continent. Back then, on the snowy plains of the land of demons, Su Li had pulled out that sword from the umbrella. With one strike, he had beheaded a demon general, and with another, he had cut open a path of life. How mighty had he been! But now, that heaven-shrouding sword was clearly no longer in the umbrella. Martial Uncle said that he could give you the umbrella, but he could not give you the sword that left Mount Li. He gave the heaven-shrouding sword Su Yurong paused, then continued he gave it to Senior. She did not explicitly say that it was given to that senior in the Mount Li Sword sect, but Chen Chongqing knew that she was definitely speaking of Qiushan Jun. This was the first time that he had mentioned Qiushan Jun's name to her. Chen Chongqing felt rather uncomfortable. Perhaps it was because she had said the word senior so naturally, or perhaps it was because, in the past few years, that name had always been placed together with her name. Or perhaps it was because he and she had cultivated and grown together. In reality, she truly was more familiar with him than he was with her. "What's wrong?" Su Yurong tilted her head and asked. Chen Chongqing lowered his head to look at the umbrella in his hand, as if he was studying something. He casually replied, "It's nothing." The two seemed rather ignorant, but in reality they understood everything. "Martial uncle, Su also wanted me to bring you 2 letters. Su Yurong took out 2 letters from her bosom and handed them over to him. For some reason, as her fingers gripped the letters, her brow slightly creased. The moment Chen Chongqing took the letters, he felt like his fingertips were being pricked by needles, stabbing into his heart. He hurriedly mobilized his spiritual sense, and only then was he able to forcefully suppress the urge to throw the letters away. These 2 letters concealed a terrifying sword intent. He glanced at Su Yurong with some shock. Su Yurong nodded her head, then pointed at the 2 letters in his hand and said, "Martial uncle, Su said that you can open the letter in the yellow envelope at any time. As for the letter in the black envelope, you have to take good care of it. In the future, if you encounter any problems that you can't resolve, then open it." In the garden of Zhou, the sword intent of the heaven-shrouding sword had reunited with the body of the sword. Outside the garden of Zhou, Su Li had reunited with the sword. That grandmaster of the path of the sword, because of this opportunity, had once again advanced. His cultivation in the path of the sword had reached an unknown level. He no longer needed the heaven-shrouding sword. He wanted to travel far away with the holy maiden. So he left the heaven-shrouding sword with Qiushan Jun and returned the yellow paper umbrella to Chen Chongqing. This seemed very fair, but it was not. Although the yellow paper umbrella was an extremely powerful defensive magical artifact, how could it compare to the famed heaven-shrouding sword? However, Chen Chongqing had no complaints. After all, the heaven-shrouding sword was the sword of the Mount Li sect master. It was only right and proper that it remain in Mount Li. He carefully put away the 2 letters. As he thought about that senior that had already gone far away, he suddenly felt somewhat sorrowful and longing. From the snowy plains of the demon realm to the south, he and Su Li had experienced many things together. Although there was an incomparably vast difference in cultivation and seniority, they could still be considered friends despite the difference in age. Just where did he and the holy maiden go? Very far away, the great western continent, a place even further than the great western continent. This answer was somewhat unexpected, but it was also reasonable. To the ordinary people of the continent, the great western continent, which was isolated beyond the sea, was already the most distant place. However, Su Li had traveled the world for several hundred years, so he had presumably gone there long ago. Now, for the sake of humanity's future, he had very confidently and easily put down all his grudges and feelings. Bringing the holy maiden with him, he floated far away. Of course, he had to go to an even further place. But was there a place even further than the great western continent? Chen Chongqing recalled a few very obscure records he had seen in the Taoist canon. He looked at Su Yurong and asked in shock, "Could it be that there really are other continents?" The records of other continents in the Taoist canon were not the personal experiences of travelers. They were written very vaguely, more like conjectures. Being well read in the Taoist canon did not mean that one knew everything in the world, because there were many things that were inconvenient or even impossible to record with words. Su Yurong was the current holy maiden. Ever since she was a child, she had lived and studied in places like the Li Palace, the Imperial Palace, and South Stream Temple, so she naturally knew a little more. It should be the sacred light continent. She said to Qin Changsheng, I heard teachers say that on the other side of the Sea of Stars, on the incomparably distant shore, there is a continent. That world is bathed in light, and lives very similar to ours live there. However, the Sea of Stars is vast and impassable. If one does not pass through the Sea of Stars, there is also an extremely firm spatial barrier between the two continents. Only supreme experts who have stepped into the divine domain have a chance of breaking through this barrier and entering the other world. Shocked, Qin Changsheng asked, Are you sure? The next chapter was at 8 in the evening. Chapter 535. I was just guessing. Su Yurong gazed at the distant horizon, where the twilight and snowflakes mingled, her beautiful face revealing a faint yearning. Since people like teacher and martial uncle Su have decided to leave this world, besides a place of legend like the sacred light continent, where else would they go? Qin Changsheng was quiet for a while, then asked, How do I get to the sacred light continent? How do I get to the Fortune Peace Road? How do I get to the Bridge of Helplessness? How do I get to the Orthodox Academy? How do I get to the Li Palace? How do I get to that place of legend? This question was actually rather absurd, but his expression was very serious. Su Yurong was also very serious, carefully recalling the conversation between the divine empress and her teacher when they were small. After a very long time, she uncertainly said 2 words, Cloudgrave. Qin Changsheng fell silent once more, but this silence lasted much longer than before. The cloud grave was the grave of all the clouds in this world, the most remote place of the continent. That place never saw the sun, making it incomparably mysterious and unknown. But he was very familiar with the cloud grave. He knew that in those countless clouds, there was an incomparably tall mountain. The mountain pierced through the clouds, leading to some unknown place. Because that mountain was 300 li behind Xining village. He had been there before. He knew that in the wetlands of the mountain peak, shrouded in clouds and mist, hid countless ferocious monsters, countless dangerous cultivators, as well as some bitter survivors of the previous dynasty. Only today did he know that this mountain peak might have been a path to another world. In the future, let's go to the sacred light continent together and take a look, he very seriously asked Su Yurong. Even if the legend was true, that there really was a place called the Sacred Light Continent on the other side of the Sea of Stars, since no one had ever known of it, it meant that no one had ever succeeded in breaking through the barrier of space and finding that world. He and Su Yurong were both cultivating geniuses, but they were still very far from the divine domain. To them, the Sacred Light Continent was just an illusory name and a guess. Yet he had very seriously sent out his invitation, perhaps several hundred years in advance. At this moment, he had long ago forgotten that he might not live past 20. Su Yurong smiled. Okay. Qin Changsheng thought, really good. Upon returning to the Orthodox Academy and entering the first floor, he was somewhat surprised to discover that Zheshio's room was open and that Su Moyu and the others were inside. What are you talking about? He walked in curiously. Su Moyu said, Since this morning, Tang Tang has been asking people if love at first sight really exists in this world. Tang 36 looked at Qin Changsheng and sneered. Qin Changsheng became nervous and asked, Why did you suddenly mention this? Who knows what happened to him today? Shen Yuan said with some grievance. I answered him seriously, but he scolded me instead. Zheshio stood by the window and suddenly said, Su Li has left. She should still be at Mount Li, right? Qin Changsheng was shocked. He thought that he had been found out that he was with Su Yurong. But in the next moment, he realized that he was actually trying to confirm the answer. The information brought by the southern ambassadors should be accurate. When Tang 36 said this, he glanced at Qin Changsheng again. Qin Changsheng ignored him and asked Zheshio with concern, What do you plan to do? In the current Orthodox Academy, from the principal to the director to the head of logistics to the instructors, they were all extremely young. Not a single one was over 20. They were all young, and what they cared about the most was the bone-deep beauty and sorrow of young people. Besides the engagement and battle between Qin Changsheng and Su Yurong, there was also the story of Zhixio and Qi Jian. Zhixio looked at the snow outside the window, a hint of viciousness flashing across his face that still carried a hint of inexperience despite being weathered by wind and snow. Once I finish my business in the capital, I'll go to Mount Li to pick her up. Chen Changsheng and the others looked at each other. They had heard very clearly that Zhixio had not used the word look, but pick up. They seemed to be able to see the countless battles that would take place on Mount Li in the future. Those mottled wolf blood. Zhixio was seeking death. But the problem was that no one in this world could stop him from seeking death. Tang 36 did not want Zhixio to enter a crazed state of mind, so he shot a glance at Su Mou and asked, "What business do you want to take care of in the capital?" Su Mou understood, thinking no matter how Zhixio answers, we have to make this matter a little more difficult. Only in this way can we delay Zhixio from going to Mount Li to throw away his life. I want to kill Zhou Tong. Zhixio turned around and expressionlessly said to them. The room was very quiet. After a moment of silence, Tang 36 said, "Then let's all disperse. In any case, this isn't something that can be settled in 8 or 10 years." Not long after the crowd dispersed, he came to Qin Changsheng's room, not minding that he was covered in snow and mud. He bluntly sat down on the bed that was so clean that not even a single strand of hair could be found. He then pointed at Chen Changsheng and said with absolute certainty, "There is no such thing as love at first sight in this world." Chen Changsheng glanced at the muddy water dripping from the hem of his clothes, controlled his emotions, and said, "Just what are you trying to say?" "Oh, I wasn't precise enough. Of course it's possible that you fell in love with Su Yurong at first sight. Even someone as perfect as Qiu Shanjun, someone that even I am somewhat envious of, had such a deep love for her, let alone a little boy like you who has never experienced the matters between a man and a woman." Tang 36 looked at him and said, "But it's absolutely impossible for her to fall in love with you at first sight. So there's a problem with this matter." Chen Changsheng didn't really care about this problem, but he was rather curious, so he asked, "Why can't she?" Tang 36 pointed at the dressing table by the wall and said, "Go look in the mirror." Chen Changsheng really did as he was told and walked over. Looking at himself in the mirror, he said, "I'm not ugly." Tang 36 opened his mouth, but he was completely speechless. He once again confirmed that Su Yurong and Chen Changsheng really were both people that made people speechless. Qin Changsheng looked at himself in the mirror and began to chuckle. Tang 36 angrily yelled, "In any case, it's impossible for her to fall in love with you at first sight on the bridge of helplessness. Even if it's because of the engagement that she's imagined you many times, it's still impossible, because you're just not ugly. You're far from being good-looking, and you're definitely not as good-looking as me." Qin Changsheng turned to look at him and asked, "And then?" Tang 36 stood up and walked in front of him. Staring into his eyes, he said, "I'm worried that she has some sort of plan for you." No matter who it was, as long as they didn't know the story of the Garden of Zhou, once they discovered that Su Yurong and Qin Changsheng were dating, they would definitely feel that there was a problem. Qin Changsheng understood, so he didn't have any resistance, much less anger. He comforted, "Relax, it's fine." His words were very natural but very firm. Seeing his expression, Tang 36 fell silent for a while, then suddenly said, "You've met before." Qin Changsheng thought about Su Yurong's orders and shook his head. Tang 36 sneered, "She wouldn't have fallen in love with you at first sight, but she did. This means that it wasn't the first time you've met." This reasoning could be said to be full of flaws, but it was also impeccable. Chen Changsheng didn't know what to do, so he explained, "When we were young, we exchanged letters, so we can't be considered strangers." "Lie, keep lying." Tang 36 expressionlessly said to him. Qin Chang Sheng really had no other choice. He looked at him and earnestly pleaded, "Then you have to keep this a secret. You can't tell anyone." Tang 36's expression instantly relaxed. He walked up and put his arm around Qin Changsheng's shoulder, not forgetting to close the window. Arching his brows, he said, "Who am I? You still can't relax with me?" If he really were to tell this story, big and small, again and again, how long would it take? How many words? How many? After hearing what had happened in the garden of Zhou, Tang 36 was so shocked that he didn't speak for a very long time. Finally, he looked at Qin Changsheng and let out the same sigh. "Are you a pig?" Qin Changsheng was very ashamed. He didn't have the confidence to refute those words. He thought of another matter and asked, "I don't understand why she doesn't want me to tell anyone else." Tang 36 was very speechless. "You don't even understand? You really are a pig." After being scolded twice, Qin Changsheng still felt somewhat uncomfortable. He said, "Didn't she also not recognize me in the Garden of Zhou? That's why it's said that fate is preordained by the heavens. The two of you are called fate made by the heavens." Tang 36 opened the window and gazed at the starry sky after the snow had stopped and the clouds had dispersed. He was deeply moved. Qin Changsheng was very happy to hear these words. "Thank you for your blessing." Tang 36 turned around and sternly said, "You and Suyu Rong are like a male pig and a female pig. Of course, you're very compatible." Su Li's two letters were very strange. The moment he took the letters, Qin Changsheng was sure of this fact, so he did not open them in front of Su Yurong. Instead, he waited until the dead of night and then walked alone to the kitchen across the lake. After making all sorts of preparations, he used the stainless sword to cut them open. The stainless sword could be said to be the sharpest sword in the world. It very easily cut a thin line out of the yellow envelope, but his brow creased because he could clearly sense that when the stainless sword's edge had traveled through the envelope, it had encountered countless extremely thin and tenacious strands of qi. These strands of qi were like tough iron bars. If the stainless sword had not been sharp enough, then with his current level of cultivation, it would have been impossible for him to cut open the envelope. He took a few deep breaths, calmed his mind, and then took the letter out of the envelope. It was a thin, ordinary letter, but when he unfolded it and used the dim light of the firewood to read it, countless tiny strands of sword intent gushed out of the letter, transforming into countless snowflakes outside the house, or like willow leaves falling from the Luo River at the end of summer. Swish, 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 swish. Countless sharp and even somewhat mournful noises resounded around him. These were all sword intents. The iron pot on the stove was instantly chopped into countless pieces. The ceramic tiles on the stove were chopped into pieces, and soon after, the firewood by the stove was also chopped into pieces. The firewood burning in the stove was also chopped into pieces, sparks flying in all directions. Even the burning embers seemed to be chopped into pieces by those sword intents. Qin Changsheng stood amidst the drifting sword intents, his expression solemn, not daring to move. Chapter 536. Qin Changsheng had long since been prepared for the sword intents that Su Li had hidden in the letter. At the very beginning, he had wanted to see how long he could resist after his return to the capital, which had increased his cultivation by quite a bit. However, he had never imagined that the sword intents in the letter would be so sharp and terrifying, let alone resisting. He didn't even dare to touch them. Of course, Su Li did not have any malice towards him, much less any killing intent. The sword intents that floated up from the letter noiselessly chopped up many things in the kitchen, and even chopped off a piece of his floating belt. However, not a single sword intent landed on his body, only dancing around him. The sword intents danced around his body like falling leaves, snowflakes, and droplets of water. Qin Changsheng felt like he was standing under an autumn tree, under a snowy sky, under a waterfall. He vaguely understood something and gradually relaxed his mind, sending his spiritual sense into the world formed from sword intents. These sword intents were the letter that Su Li had given him, one of the gifts that he had left for him. Then what was written on the letter? As Chen Chongqing comprehended the sordid intents that Su Li had left behind after his breakthrough, he quietly read the letter. Su Li's handwriting was just like his person and his sword, free and unrestrained, happy and sharp. The strokes were extremely steep and the strokes were extremely sharp. You were actually able to defeat Yurong. This is truly surprising news. Upon seeing the first sentence on the letter, Chen Chongqing finally understood that Su Li had given him a letter with conditions. The precondition was that he had to defeat Su Yurong. If he could not do this, Su Li would definitely be disappointed in him. And then these 2 letters might have been left for Su Yurong, or perhaps Choshan Jun. But when I think about how your sword could be considered to have been taught by me, then it's understandable that you could barely defeat Yurong. The words that Su Li had written in the letter still perfectly displayed his self-confidence, or perhaps his narcissism. But after that, his words became much calmer, much more indifferent. In my life, I've only taught 3 people: Qiushan, you, and Qi Jian. Qiushan is stronger than you. Qi Jian is weaker than you, and she's also my daughter. After I leave, if something happens to Mount Li, help me take care of her. As for why I left, when you live for a few hundred years and realize that someone has been waiting for you for a few hundred years, perhaps you will understand. I am the junior martial uncle of Mount Li. I do not need to explain anything to the disciples of the mountain. I am Su Li. I do not need to explain anything to old man Yin or Tian Hai. But I still want to explain a few things, tell them a few things, so I wrote this letter to you. If anyone asks, you can tell them what I said. I didn't admit defeat to this world, but she was right. I am Su Li, so why should I be the second, Zhou, ******. Most importantly, you're right. I've killed countless people. I have no love for this world. But perhaps I still have a shred of kindness? Seeing this sentence, Chen Chongsheng's heart was filled with many emotions. In the view of many people, especially those Southerners who opposed the confluence of the North and South, Su Li and the Holy Maiden drifting away was an extremely irresponsible escape. Who could understand that for a person like Su Li, only by clinging to the sword of true wisdom and courage could he cut open this path of departure? But when he reached the end of the letter, he suddenly felt that his praise and admiration for Senior Su Li seemed wrong. At the end of the letter, Su Li wrote these words: "Make that wolf cub give up on that idea. If he dares to bother my daughter again, even if I'm on the other side of the sea of stars, I will ride the star chariot back and first kill him with one strike, then kill you with one strike, and finally exterminate your Orthodox Academy and that wolf tribe in the north. Don't say I didn't warn you." After Chen Chongqing finished reading these words, he helplessly thought to himself, why can a free and unrestrained person like Senior Su Li take this matter so seriously? As he was thinking this, the air around him suddenly began to resound with the terrifying cries of swords. Countless sword intents returned from every direction and fell upon the letter. Those extremely sharp and profound sword intents of an unfathomable level chopped the handwriting on the letter into pieces, transforming it into innumerable blobs of ink that could no longer be clearly seen. Those blobs of ink ultimately transformed into 4 large words: "Burn after reading." Chen Chongqing stared blankly at these 4 words. He felt that if he just burned it like this, wouldn't it be a pity? It must be known that the sword intent on this letter was an incomparably precious gift to those who cultivated the sword. He had originally planned to have Tang 36, Zhixiu, and the others come tomorrow to comprehend it, but since it was Su Li's order, he could not oppose it. He very obediently threw the letter into the embers of the stove and watched as the letter was burned to ash. As he gazed at the ash in the stove and thought of the sword intent on the letter, he suddenly thought of the all-school martial exhibition a few days ago, when those initial level star condensation experts came to challenge the Orthodox Academy. That painter from the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets had probably used a similar method. But compared to Su Li, it was like the difference between the clouds and the mud. He also thought of that scholar he had seen on the side of the street, the Heavenly Tao Academy's Guanbai. At the time he had glanced at this person through the window and felt a sharp, intense stab into his eyes. It was so painful that he almost shed tears. Now that he thought about it, this person's cultivation in the path of the sword was already so powerful that sword intent possessed his body. In next year's Boiling Stone Summit, he would have to face such a powerful sword. Would he be able to win? Even earlier, Guanbai had been reading in a study in the southern part of the city. Suddenly he sensed something. After a moment of silence, he quietly closed the book and walked out of the study. In the evening, the snow gradually stopped, but the weather was still bitterly cold. The accumulated snow made it difficult to walk on the streets, so there were few pedestrians. He stood in the middle of the street. An old Taoist nun walked past him. In truth, this Taoist nun's appearance could still be considered young. At the very least, it was impossible to tell her exact age, but her face was filled with an awe-inspiring coldness and a sense of obsolescence. Guanbai silently watched as the old Taoist nun got closer and closer. He did not recognize her background, but he knew that her cultivation was far above his own, perhaps even surpassing his respected master, Zhuangzi Huan. Before the Boiling Stone Summit, he did not want to meddle, nor should he have battled with an expert of such profound cultivation. But he had clearly heard that a wild dog had died in that distant alley. Just as the old Taoist nun walked past, this old Taoist nun was very powerful and assuredly had an extraordinary background. Compared to her, the life of a wild dog blocking the road truly wasn't much. Guanbai also believed this. If a wild dog died, then it died. Was he going to take revenge for a wild dog? The problem was that the wild dog should have died even faster. The old Taoist nun only needed a glance for that wild dog's head to be separated from its body. But that wild dog had screamed 30-some times in the alley, growing more and more miserable, more and more sorrowful, until he could hear it. He found it impossible to understand why a powerful figure like the old Taoist nun would need 30-some strikes to kill a wild dog. He found it impossible to imagine if this old Taoist nun would also be like this when she normally killed people. So he walked out of the study onto the street, wanting to ask the old Taoist nun. The old Taoist nun stopped and expressionlessly gazed at him. Guanbai wanted to say something, but when he saw the old Taoist nun's eyes, he realized that he could no longer speak. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword, but he could not pull it out. The old Taoist nun's eyes were a green color, brimming with decay and ruthlessness. They were like a tide of green algae that surged toward him. Boundless green-killing intent surged out from the snowy street and enveloped his body. Squelch! A stream of blood spurted from his mouth and fell onto the snow. He was the pride of the Heavenly Tao Academy, an expert of the sword ranked in the middle ranks of the Proclamation of Liberation. Great name Guanbai. Yet in front of this old Taoist nun, he was unable to utter a single word, unable to pull out his sword before he was heavily injured. "Report your master," the old Taoist nun expressionlessly said. Guanbai's eyes were filled with shock. Only now did he confirm that this old Taoist nun's strength not only far surpassed his teacher's, but had even faintly transcended the realm of the mortal world and entered the divine domain. And when he thought of that green color in her eyes, he instantly guessed at who she was. Wu Qiong-bai of the storms of the 8 directions. This was already the peak expert of the mortal world. So why had she suddenly appeared tonight in the capital? Heavenly Tao Academy's Guanbai. My master is Zhuangzi Huan. Because of the old Taoist nun's identity, Guanbai was incomparably shocked, but he still felt no fear as he stared at her. For the sake of Mao Chuyu, I'll spare your life tonight. The old Taoist nun slowly walked past him, her figure gradually vanishing into the darkness. After some time, Guanbai finally realized that he could move. The right hand gripping the hilt of his sword slightly trembled, and with a clang, the edge of his sword half unsheathed. Then his right arm was severed at the shoulder and dropped into the snow, a vast expanse of dark red blood. Tonight, in the capital, a wild dog in an alley was cruelly chopped into pieces. The pride and hope of the Heavenly Tao Academy, the young expert of the sword with limitless prospects. Guanbai had lost the right arm with which he gripped his sword. The old Taoist nun, who had done these two things, felt nothing. Her expression was still indifferent, her eyes still ruthless. In her eyes, a young man like Guanbai was not much different from a wild dog in an alley. If this were not the capital of the great Zhou, with the Pope whom even she had to respect, and the divine Empress whom she did not dare provoke, perhaps Guanbai would already be dead. In her view, sparing Guanbai's life was already giving Mao Chuyu enough face. To be more precise, this face was giving the orthodoxy. There were some people in this world who were extremely strong, so their view of the world was somewhat distorted. They believed that by not stealing all the food in a beggar's bowl, they were giving the beggar face, and by not killing all the people they disliked, they were giving life face, so the other party should also give them face. The old Taoist nun had come to the capital tonight precisely because she believed that the Pope had not given her enough face, so she had come to personally retrieve it. When she was very young, she had been married to another of the storms of the 8 directions. From that moment on, she believed that her husband was her most important face. Later on, when she painstakingly gave birth to a son, she believed that her son was her most important face. The old Taoist nun stood behind the wall of the Orthodox Academy, expressionlessly gazing at the several snowy trees protruding from the wall. Several dozen days ago, her son had suffered the humiliation of a person in this very place. That person was called Chun Chongxing. The name of the chapter was better, so there was no need to use 2. Today there is only 1 chapter, so there is no 2. Chapter 537. I have revised the last few sentences of the first chapter. It does not affect it. You can choose to read it or not. The next chapter will be at 8 in the evening. Su Li had left behind 7 letters. He had Su Yurong give 2 of the letters to Qin Chongsheng. 1 letter was left for his own daughter, and the other was left for the child in the smithy at the base of Mount Li who had just started learning the sword. He had also prepared a letter for Qiu Shanjun, but it had been calmly rejected by Qiu Shanjun. There were also 2 letters that had been sent through the most ordinary of postal routes to 2 different places. One of them had been sent to a manor outside Hanqiu City, the Myriad Willows Garden. Within the garden were 30,000 cold-resistant, curved willows. Zhu Luo was the sect master of the emotion-severing sect, the head of the Zhu clan, an old friend of Emperor Xian, and a member of the storms of the 8 directions. Any one of these identities could allow him to live a life that ordinary people could not imagine. This manor that was still green, even in the cold of winter, was proof. Today there was a guest in the manor. It was a very fat old man who sat on a round wooden armchair. His fat waist was like water flowing over a river bank, and a lot of it flowed down. Thus, that bright yellow belt was also highlighted even more clearly. This fat old man had a kind and benevolent countenance. His squinted eyes filled with a calm and gentleness that stood aloof from worldly affairs. His face was filled with joy, and he looked just like the most ordinary of wealthy people in the countryside. However, for him to be able to sit across from an important figure like Zhu Luo, one could imagine that his identity was certainly not ordinary. Today, other than the 10,000 willows and the accumulated snow, there was not a single person in the manor. Perhaps it had something to do with this fat old man's visit. But of course, it also had something to do with the letter placed on the table between the 2. When will that woman die? The fat old man smiled as he spoke, but when he said the word woman, he unexpectedly paused, the smile on his face vanishing for a moment. The word woman was so soft that it was almost inaudible. The starry sky has its own arrangements. As for when to go to the capital, we'll have to wait for news. Zhu Luo slightly creased his brow, seemingly not very satisfied with these words. No matter how you look at it, my strength is still somewhat lacking. The fat old man sighed. To accomplish great things, one must have mighty strength. The White Emperor couple will definitely watch from the sidelines. In truth, our best choice is still Su Li. When Su Li's name was mentioned, neither he nor Zhu Luo glanced at the letter on the table. After a moment of silence, Zhu Luo said, Su Li truly is very strong. At the time in Xuanyang City, Su Li had been heavily injured and had not exchanged blows with him. But he had to admit that purely in terms of strength, it was difficult to find someone in the world stronger than Su Li. The word power in this conversation naturally did not refer to ordinary power as understood by ordinary people. It referred to the purest and most terrifying combat strength. Black Robe has been preparing for many years. On the snowy plains of the demon realm, there were more than 100,000 cavalry and wolf cavalry, more than 10 demon generals, and 3 powerhouses working together to suppress him. But he still managed to escape. After that, he went all the way back to the south, using a useless person to wash his sword and become a new person. He must have comprehended something and reached the peak of 10,000 zhang. I'm afraid he's 1 foot closer to the Sea of Stars. He's indeed extremely strong. The fat old man sighed and said, Back then many people, including me, thought that he was the only one who had the best chance to kill that woman, but he refused to do it. Now, with his help, the possibility of killing that woman will increase by 30%, but he just had to leave it this time. Zhu Luo expressionlessly replied, I accepted His Holiness the Pope's request and went to Xuanyang City to kill him. How could he join us? And how could he send me this letter? As the two spoke, they did not even glance at the letter on the table. Their minds had actually always been on this letter. Now that it was mentioned, their gazes finally fell. No strange changes occurred in the quiet and secluded winter garden, but in the chilly wind one could faintly hear the clattering of spears and armored horses. As he gazed at the letter, the fat old man narrowed his eyes like a snow-white steamed bun that had been cut into a slit by a knife. Within the slit was a scorching light, making him abnormally vigilant. Then he raised his head to look at Zhu Luo, as if asking, should he open this letter or not? Zhu Luo's expression was very solemn. For a very long time he did not speak. The fat old man could sense the strangeness of this letter, and with his level of cultivation, he could naturally see through it as well. He knew that this letter concealed a sword. The letter was Su Li's letter, and the sword was naturally Su Li's sword. Although Su Li had an extremely high status in the cultivation world and was publicly acknowledged to be inconceivably strong in the path of the sword, compared to the storms of the 8 directions and the 4 saints, he was still a junior. Moreover, for various reasons, his name had never been placed in this list. He had written this letter to Zhu Luo to tell the entire continent that as long as he wanted to, he could cut down the so-called storms of the 8 directions at any time. If this were several hundred years ago, when he was at his peak, no, even several decades ago or even a year ago, faced with this letter, Zhu Luo would have smiled without the slightest care and then opened the letter to take a look at the edge of the paper. Only by doing so would he not disgrace the prestige of the storms of the 8 directions. But now he was somewhat hesitant, because he had suffered very heavy injuries in Xuanyang City. Even now he had still not completely recovered. Those injuries had come from Wang Po's blade, Lu Qing's hidden sword, and the 10,000 streams of light in Chen Chongqing's sheath. The most serious injury had come from the Holy Maiden's 1,000 Li Dash. An even more important reason was that, just as Wang Po had said in Xuanyang City, he was already old. Su Li had once mocked and mentioned that the current him could die, but he could not be defeated. He was the towering tree of the emotion-severing sect and the Zhu clan, other than the people of the Liang household. All the people of Tianliang County needed his protection. What if he lost? The winter courtyard was extremely quiet. In the distance, the tens of thousands of cold-resistant willows patiently waited in the cold wind for the arrival of spring. The plump old man was also very patient. He only calmly gazed at Zhu Luo. After some time, Zhu Luo finally made his decision and took in a deep breath. A fierce gale suddenly arose in the winter courtyard. The tens of thousands of willows swayed in the wind, seeming to be cheering, but also seeming to be waving their hands in fear. Not a hint of hesitation could be seen on Zhu Luo's face, only indifference and cold arrogance. He was the strongest human expert who had once charged through the snowy plains with only his sword, even with his old injuries. How could he be frightened by a letter? His hand fell on the letter very steadily, and then he tore it open. A sword glow shot out from the tear in the letter, illuminating his face and making it seem very pale. This sword glow was so bright that even the winter sun above the winter courtyard seemed to dim. Smoke rose from the willows. It was clearly daytime, but it seemed like dusk had descended. A sword glow appeared in Zhu Luo's eyes. This sword glow did not come from the letter, but from his world. With a clang, the moonlight sword left its sheath and slashed at the sword intent bursting from the letter. Countless deafening collisions could be heard. A fierce gale blew through the myriad willows garden, causing the tens of thousands of willows to sway unsteadily. A bright moon came from the north, hanging in the sky of the winter courtyard as if it wanted to drive away the darkness that had yet to arrive. The sword intent from the letter completely ignored this. In an instant, it exploded with light. Everything it touched, whether real or illusory, began to burn. The willows suddenly burst into flames, the frozen pond shattered, and countless flames soared into the sky like birds of fire. The golden crow left Mount Li. The bright moon suddenly dimmed. Chapter 538. When Zhu Luo opened Su Li's letter, the chubby old man sat on the side with a smile, not at all worried. He naturally knew that Su Li was very strong, that Su Li's sword was very terrifying, but this was still just a letter. Even if it contained Su Li's sword intent and soul, the medium was limited. So how could it truly injure Zhu Luo? The chubby old man even felt some disdain for Zhu Luo's hesitation. He thought to himself, perhaps the matter of the capital requires other arrangements. But when that sword intent broke out of the letter and plunged the entire myriad willows garden into darkness, the chubby old man realized that he was wrong. Su Li's sword was even more powerful and terrifying than he imagined. Just by relying on the sword intent on the letter, it was actually able to suppress a supreme expert on the level of the storms of the 8 directions. Although Zhu Luo was injured, this was still too inconceivable. The level of that sword intent had even faintly surpassed Zhu Luo by a level. Even the will of a sage might not be able to achieve this. Besides legendary experts like Zhou Dufu, Chen Xuanba, Emperor Taizong, or Wang Jitsa, who could do this? Su Li was not a saint, but his path of the sword was close to that of a god. Seeing the golden crows spurting out of the winter garden and the sudden dimming of the bright moon in the night sky, the chubby old man revealed a shocked expression. Without any time to think, he floated over. Zhu Luo was already in danger. If he did not act now, it would be too late. With a howl, the chubby old man's 2 palms tore through the air in front of him and slapped at the blazing sword intense like the golden crows. He looked like a mountain of flesh, but his movements were very gentle. His 2 palms descended similarly gently, slowly flapping, just like a real bird. The golden crow sword was a secret sword of Mount Li, originating from Su Li. Its sword intent was incomparably blazing. Once the sword rose up, it would endlessly spit out light and heat into the outside world with unstoppable momentum. Back in the Grand Examination and the Garden of Zhou, Qin Changsheng had used the golden crow sword several times, and even opponents stronger than him had to temporarily avoid its edge. Today's golden crow sword intents came from Su Li's hands, so their power was even more unimaginable. If it were a normal cultivator, they would probably be melted into smoke before they could even touch the sword intents. Even experts of extremely profound cultivation could only do what Zhu Luo did, relying on the moonlight sword intent to contend against it. They did not dare to directly touch it. For some reason, although the plump old man had a wary expression on his face, he still swatted at the golden crow sword intent. An indescribable aura appeared in the ruined courtyard of Myriad Willow's garden. That aura was very strong, but it was actually not as strong as Zhu Luo's moonlight sword and tent. However, that aura gave off a very ancient feeling. A real sun appeared in the middle of the fat old man's palm. It was extremely bright and dazzling. Under the illumination of the light, the chubby old man's face no longer showed any signs of joy. His benevolent countenance became incomparably dignified, and the image of a dragon and tiger appeared behind him. At this moment, he was no longer a common rich man in the countryside. He was clearly an emperor. 3 powerful auras met in the Myriad Willow's garden. The moonlight shone in the sky with difficulty. The scorching sun kept pushing down the curtain of night. Countless sword wills flew between the sky and the sun like firebirds. Tens of thousands of cold-resistant willows began to burn. This was not a flame brought by the twilight, but a real burning. The cold winter garden seemed to have instantly fallen into the scorching abyss of hell. With a massive boom, sparks flew everywhere, scorched willows toppled, wells shattered, and walls collapsed. After some time, those berserk cheese finally began to subside. The courtyard was in ruins, and the cold pool could no longer illuminate anyone. Zhu Luo leaned against a withered willow by the pool, his face pale and his chest stained with blood. Even more serious was that his left hand had been severed at the wrist. The fat old man stood on a tattered table, his fat body squeezing the edge of the table so tightly that it seemed like it might break at any moment. His fat face no longer showed any signs of joy, nor did it have the majesty of an emperor. All that was left was exhaustion and unsightly appearance. Starting many years ago, he had already seen the threshold of the divine domain. If not for his fear of that person in the capital, perhaps he would have already stepped over it. And in the previous battle, he had even displayed a strength not inferior to that of the divine domain. But he and Zhu Luo had still lost, and had lost so miserably. If not for the fact that the target of that sword and tent had been Zhu Luo, if not for the fact that his clan's technique was similar to the Tao of the Golden Crow sword, he would have definitely been heavily injured. And even with his help, Zhu Luo might already be dead. And their opponent was just a letter from Su Li. Zhu Luo slowly stood up and gazed at the surrounding plains. The Myriad Willow's garden that used to be infinitely beautiful was now a scorched earth. In the distance, some willows were still burning. The Myriad Willow's garden still existed, but it no longer had its name. Just like him now, he was keenly aware that this was Su Li's vengeance. He had nothing to say to this. "Forgive me for not being able to participate in the matter of the capital," Zhu Luo said to the fat old man. He did not turn around, his expression rather lonely. The fat old man knew that this was inevitable, let alone the fact that Zhu Luo might never be able to recover his peak strength. There was even a high chance that he would leave the ranks of the storms of the 8 directions. To Zhu Luo, how to arrange the future of his clan and the emotion-severing sect was the most important matter, because that was his true funeral business. The fat old man swayed his mountainous body as he walked out of the Myriad Willow's garden. Outside Hanqiu City, with the assistance of his subordinates, he somewhat arduously climbed onto a massive carriage. A middle-aged man with a face covered in powder and a rather shrill voice whispered, "Your Highness, what happened?" "Did you know? I originally thought that, if I succeeded, the first thing I would do would be to seize the Liang household's imperial carriage." The fat old man narrowed his eyes and gazed in the direction of Xuanyang City. He sadly said, "But now I don't know if I'll ever have the chance to sit on it." He was gazing at Xuanyang City, but in reality he was gazing at the capital. He was speaking of the Liang household's imperial carriage, but in reality he was referring to the throne in the imperial palace. The middle-aged man had already been extremely uneasy from the strange change that had occurred in the Myriad Willow's garden, and now that he heard the sigh of the prince, he felt even more uneasy. He and those soldiers and civil officials were all subordinates of the prince's household, but they could only listen to the orders of the capital. In these past few years, he and his subordinates had braved enormous risks to help the prince run about. If the prince failed in his great undertaking, how could they possibly survive? Wu Qiongbai has entered the capital. The middle-aged man wanted to reinvigorate the prince's confidence, so he hurriedly relayed the news he had just received. The fat old man was somewhat surprised. Although Wu Qiongbai was also a storm of the 8 directions, she had never been one of his recruitment targets because she was also a woman. What was that old Taoist nun doing in the capital? Could there be some sort of variable? Chapter 539. Su Li had sent a letter to Hanzhou City, turning the myriad willows garden into scorched earth, and Zhu Luo was no more. For the time being, this matter had not spread throughout the continent. At the moment, the continent was mostly discussing what sort of changes Su Li and the Holy Maiden would bring to the world after they left together. The happiest was naturally the Longevity Sect. The Longevity Sect was known as the source of all mountains, standing side by side with Holy Maiden Peak. They were both holy lands in the hearts of the Southerners, and they had an extremely close relationship with the great Zhou imperial clan and the Liang household. They also had countless connections with the great clans of the South that were difficult to sever. They were powerful to an unimaginable degree, until that startling change 10-some years ago, when the Longevity Sect imprisoned the demon princess in a cold pool and attempted to coerce Su Li into going north to the capital to assassinate the Tianhai Divine Empress. Su Li charged into the mountain alone, and when he discovered that his wife was deeply poisoned and was powerless to reverse the situation, in a fit of rage, he slaughtered 10-some elders of the Longevity Sect and then massacred the Longevity Sect. After he recovered from his heavy injuries, he went north to Xuanyang City and slaughtered everyone in the Liang household. At least half of Su Li's peerless and vicious reputation came from this. From then on, no one dared to casually provoke Su Li. At the same time, the Longevity Sect no longer had its former prestige. Many sects and monasteries gradually turned their backs on the sect, and places like the Mount Li Sword sect only had respect on the surface. In reality, they had long since taken matters into their own hands. In the view of the Longevity Sect, Su Li was naturally the main culprit behind all this. If they could kill Su Li, they would have done so long ago. Although they could not do it, fortunately Su Li had left. In the last few days, although the Longevity Sect had no lanterns, the atmosphere was extremely good. The footsteps of the disciples seemed to have become much more relaxed. As for those elders that had struggled at death's door, they even began to celebrate ahead of time and yearn for the beautiful life ahead of them. The Mount Li Sword sect is the sword of my Longevity Sect, so it naturally has to be held in our hands. During the internal strife of Mount Li, the Qiushan clan head had suddenly turned against them. The Longevity Sect's elder Liang that he had invited had been injured and was still recuperating. As a result, the cave he resided in became the place where the Longevity Sect elders discussed business. One of the elders, a tall and thin elder, indifferently but with an incomparably firm expression, said a few words. Elder Liang thought back to the 10,000 sword glows from Mount Li and slightly creased his brow. Just how difficult it is to repeat the past. Hearing this, the cave abode fell silent. In the past, with the exception of Holy Maiden Peak, which sect in the entire Tian and dared to disobey a single order from the Longevity Sect, what about all these years, let alone the Mount Li Sword sect? Even the Qiushan clan dared to secretly attack the Longevity Sect? Our sect's qi and blood have been consumed, so how good can Mount Li be? After the matter with Elder Xiao Songgong, Mount Li has already suffered a great blow to its vitality. Those fellows of the same generation as us, or those of the younger generation, especially those people in the training hall, have all suffered a backlash from the array. Their injuries are not light, so they probably won't be able to come out and oversee matters for a while. Don't forget, right now, the one managing Mount Li's affairs is Qiushan. Qiushan, a young genius. He's indeed extraordinary, but he's still young, isn't he? The tall and thin elder said with an indifferent expression, "Not only Mount Lee, but also South Stream Temple. The current Holy Maiden is also very young. It's true that she has enough prestige, but she's only 16 and hasn't even reached star condensation. As elders of the same sect, it's only right and proper for us to help her handle some affairs. This is the concern of the younger generation." Hearing this, Elder Liang fell silent, while the other elder revealed a joyful expression. Elder Liang sighed, then said, "But have you ever thought about what to do if Su Li returns?" After a moment of silence in the dwelling, the tall and thin elder sneered. With Su Li's pride, since he announced to the entire world that he was leaving, how could he possibly go somewhere else? Just as we guessed a few days ago, he and the Holy Maiden should be preparing to go to the legendary shore on the other side of the Sea of Stars. So how will he return? Elder Liang looked at him and said sincerely, "But what if the legend is true? If he really does find the sacred light continent, then there will still be a day when he returns." A hint of fear flashed through the tall and thin elder's eyes, but he still unyieldingly said, "It's rumored that Zhou Dufu finally shattered the void and left. He probably also wanted to go there, but not even he was able to find it. At least he was unable to return. No matter how strong Su Li is, could he be stronger than him?" The other elder also advised, "Senior brother, there's no need to worry too much. Su Li probably won't be able to return." In the midst of winter, the longevity sect in the south was still warm. There was no snow on the mountains, only the incessant drizzle, as if it was sending him off in joy. Su Li had left, and it was unknown if he would ever return, or when he would return, but his letter had arrived. Looking at the thin letter on the table, no one spoke for a very long time, nor did they make any movements. The three people at the table had abnormally nasty complexions, as if they had seen a demon from the deepest depths of the abyss. The three remaining elders of the longevity sect seemed to have been scared out of their wits by this letter. The dwelling was deathly still. There was no sound at all, only the dripping of water from the ivy in the depths. Hearing the dripping of water, the tall and thin elder's complexion was abnormally ashen, and he was extremely vexed. Elder Liang's complexion was pale, his lips slightly parted, but he could not speak. There was no inscription on the letter, not even the slightest handwriting. But when their gazes fell on the letter, they could feel that sharp and frightening sword intent, stabbing them with incomparable pain. This letter contained sword intent, Su Li's sword intent. After some time, the deathly stillness in the dwelling was finally broken. The tall and thin elder yelled, "Just what does he want to do? He wants to scare us to death with a single letter?" As he said this, his chest heaved up and down, like a southern bamboo that had been roasted over a fire, ready to explode at any moment. He was truly furious, so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Yet his voice was somewhat hoarse from nervousness. He was forced to admit that even though Su Li had already left on a long journey, the letter he had left behind was still enough to intimidate the longevity sect. In truth, this was the true reason for his anger. Another elder turned to Elder Liang and uneasily asked, "Senior brother, what do we do? Should we open it?" A burst of dry laughter suddenly resounded through the dwelling. Elder Liang gazed at the letter, and his pale face suddenly gained a tinge of blood. He gazed at the green mountains, the sea of clouds, and the winter rain outside the dwelling, a hint of madness in his eyes. He harshly yelled at Su Li, "You sent this letter just to wait for us to open it and fight with the sword intent you left behind. Do you think we're stupid?" The elder had asked him if he wanted to open the letter. To him, who had lived in Su Li's shadow for tensome years, this was no problem at all. This letter naturally could not be opened, because he did not want to die. Send someone to deliver this letter to the bottom of the mountain stream and use an array to carefully suppress it. Elder Liang slightly narrowed his eyes and sneered, "I'd like to see just how long Su Li's sword intent can last under the golden light array." The tall and thin elder nodded at these words. But soon after, he thought of another important matter. Creasing his brow, he asked, "But it won't affect Chusu, right?" Upon hearing the name Chusu, the elder's expression instantly became nervous. The next chapter should be at 9 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 540. With the golden light array protecting his Tao heart, no external demons can affect Chusa's cultivation. Elder Liang continued. On the contrary, I want to borrow the array to suppress Su Li's sword intent, and then use 10,000 mountains to grind it down so that Chusu can comprehend it. Hearing this, the two elders relaxed. They thought if they really can shatter Su Li's sword intent and send it to Chusu, then perhaps Chusu really will come into the world many years earlier than the sect master had calculated before his death. At that time, the longevity sect will truly be able to flourish once more. Just as the three of them were fantasizing about the beautiful future, a sudden change occurred. The letter on the table began to fiercely tremble. With a ripping sound, the letter split open, transforming into countless paper butterflies that scattered in all directions. How could Su Li's letter need to be opened to be seen? How could the sword intent he had left behind be like those magical artifacts that needed to be activated? He wanted the people of the longevity sect to see his letter, his sword. Then, whether or not anyone opened the letter, they would definitely see it. An extremely overbearing and swift sword insight soared into the sky and slashed down. The cave resounded with the shrill cry of a sword, so much so that the similarly shrill screams were drowned out. The fierce sword intent severed everything it encountered. The swords of the three elders of profound cultivation, the longevity sect's 10,000-year indestructible cave, the soft ivy in the depths of the cave, the transparent water dripping from the ivy, the invisible wind formed by the flowing air. Everything was destroyed by this sword intent in an instant. The air was filled with bloody mist. It seemed abnormally bloody, but it also possessed a soul-stirring beauty. The three swords had been broken into 10-odd pieces. Dozens of sword marks appeared on Elder Liang's body as he collapsed amidst the ruins on the ground. Looking at the sword intent that was rushing out of the abode, his pale face was filled with endless fear and regret. He, who was already on the verge of death, used the last of his strength to scream, "Quickly, close the formation!" The two elders heard his words and realized where the problem lay. Despair appeared in their eyes, but they could not stop the sword intent from flying through the air. Because their arms had already been severed by that strand of sword insight, their entire bodies were covered in blood, and they were already unable to stand up. The sword intent transformed into a beautiful stream of light and flew down from the cliff peak. It passed over the longevity sect and pierced through the clouds, flying into a mountain stream shrouded in mist. An extremely terrifying boom erupted between heaven and earth, and a circle of clear light enveloped over a dozen mountain peaks within a radius of several hundred kilometers. It was the longevity sect's grand sect-protecting formation. Then, the sound of metal rubbing against each other rang out from the mountain stream. Countless beams of golden light shot out, and the sea of clouds rolled restlessly. A tender but resentful voice rang out from the deep ravine. It sounded like a human voice, but it also sounded like the song of a bird or some mechanical repetition. "Chusu! Chusu!" The sword whistled sharply. The voice gradually faded away and could no longer be heard. It was already late at night, but many people were still awake. Some people were awake because they loved someone, some because they hated someone, some because they missed someone, and some because they missed delicious food. Before going to sleep, Xian Yuan ate half a Tangjing roast goose for his supper, but he didn't stay in bed for long before he was hungry again. How could he sleep when he was hungry? He walked to the kitchen on the other side of the lake, intending to take out the crab sauce he had made a few days ago and eat it. Walking into the kitchen, he realized that the fire under the stove had apparently been extinguished. He paid it no mind, nor did he light a lamp. In the darkness, he very accurately felt his way to the pickle jars. In those seemingly unremarkable pickle jars, there was actually no ordinary crab sauce. He had used the incomparably valuable blue lobster to replace the crab, so it was probably lobster sauce. He was currently the logistics manager of the Orthodox Academy and had an extremely good relationship with the chefs of Clear Lake Restaurant, so he naturally did not lack for food. However, eating so extravagantly was somewhat of a waste. If Chen Chongsheng and Tang 36 were to find out, they would assuredly have a massive reaction. Thus, he did not let anyone know about these jars of lobster sauce and secretly hid them away. The more you secretly hid the food, the more fragrant it was. Xian Yuanpe did not understand many of the principles and rules of the human world, but he was very clear on this point. In the process of extending his hand towards the pickle jars, it was as if he had already tasted the extreme saltiness and freshness of the lobster sauce and the rich sweetness within, as well as that wonderful texture that spread all over the surface of his tongue. Yet his hand touched empty air. The pickle jars that should have been there had disappeared. All of them had disappeared. The lobster sauce in the pickle jars was naturally gone as well. Xian Yuanpe became abnormally angry. Several thin bolts of lightning formed in his eyes, and crackling sounds could faintly be heard from his slightly curled and messy hair. The world in front of his eyes turned from darkness to light, allowing him to clearly see the scene in the kitchen. Not only the pickle jars, the iron pot, the bowls and chopsticks, the pile of firewood, and even the stove had already been reduced to pieces, piled up on the ground. The ground was a mess. The soup on the ground was incomparably filthy. Xian Yuanpe became even angrier and more vigilant. What had happened here? Who had unleashed such a terrifying sword intent here? The entire room was filled with objects that had been chopped into pieces by the sword intent. Only the mountain sea sword was still there, quietly lying in the wood shavings. Xian Yuanpe extended his hand to pick up the mountain sea sword and followed the thin remnants of the sword intent. He discovered that in the ashes of the stove there was ash of a different color. The ash did not seem like it was made from firewood, but more like it was made from paper. After a moment of hesitation, he used the mountain sea sword to lightly pluck at the ash. The ash immediately dispersed. An unimaginable chill suddenly enveloped the entire room. Xian Yuanpe's body became abnormally stiff and his breathing became heavy. An unimaginable feeling of danger arose in his heart. The chill and feeling of danger had nothing to do with the slowly dispersing ash. Instead, it came from behind him, from behind the academy wall. It was the deepest ocean floor with a suffocating pressure and cold. The boundless blue waves had always been an ocean of death. Xian Yuanpe began to sweat, but before his sweat could even wet his clothes, it was frozen into frost by the chill that represented death. Gazing at the Orthodox Academy in the darkness, the old Taoist nun walked forward. A streak of frost appeared on the academy wall, then noiselessly softened, becoming sand in the wind. This scene was like a legend. The academy wall collapsed, and what appeared in front of her was the kitchen. Thus, the kitchen also noiselessly collapsed. Xian Yuanpe held the mountain sea sword and stood in the ruins, his body incessantly trembling, because he was very afraid. Although he was very brave, he was still very afraid. The newcomer was unimaginably strong. His qi was very cold, giving off a feeling that he wanted to exterminate all living things. In the small building on the other side of the winter lake, Zhixiu opened his eyes. Chun Changxing opened his eyes. They had all felt this feeling, and then felt an indescribable fear. The title of the chapter was randomly chosen. I've run out of words. It's also the sentence pattern I used many years ago when I was writing Vermilion Bird and the Spy when I was bored. Chapter 541. The courtyard wall noiselessly collapsed, and the old Taoist nun walked in through the gap. With her step, an incomparably powerful qi, like an ocean, instantly enveloped the entire Orthodox Academy. The students in the dormitory were still sleeping, and the Orthodoxy cavalry in the side courtyard did not sense it. Chen Changsheng and the others in the house immediately sensed it, because the old Taoist nun wanted them to wake up and remember what had happened next. They opened their eyes and sensed that cold aura of silent extinction. It was like they had fallen into a frigid ice house, and their sleepiness instantly vanished. The windows of the small building were pushed open one by one, revealing the faces of those young people. They saw the old Taoist nun on the other side of the lake. The moment they saw the old Taoist nun, the aura of silent extinction transformed into the aura of death and boundless fear. The old Taoist nun was too powerful, so powerful that they found it very difficult to even think of resisting. Seeing the old Taoist nun, Tang 36 recalled how his grandfather had once lost his temper and caused all of Winshui City to tremble. Zheshio recalled how, not long after he had been driven out of the tribe, he had once seen that massive mountain-toppling fiend from afar, as well as that short yet incomparably terrifying figure sitting on its head. Su Mayu's complexion became abnormally pale because he knew who the old Taoist nun was. At this moment, Chen Changxing very naturally recalled the storm in Xuanyang City, and only then did he realize with shock that this old Taoist nun was actually an expert of this level. Logically speaking, with Chen Changxing's current status, no one would dare to move against him in the capital. But he did not have this confidence now because this old Taoist nun was no ordinary person. Even the Pope had to give her some face, and she currently gave off an extreme aura of extinction. The extinction of birds on 1,000 mountains, the extinction of people on 10,000 paths. She viewed all living beings of the world as pigs and dogs. Who did she not dare to kill? Just then, Su Mayu's voice rang out. He looked at the old Taoist nun and asked in shock, "Aunt, what do you want to do?" Upon hearing this, Chen Changxing and the others finally confirmed their conjectures and knew the identity of the newcomer. Tang 36's expression did not change, but the fingers of his fingers resting on the windowsill were somewhat white. Zheshio's expression did not change, but the fingers of his right hand had already slowly loosened their grip on the cane and gripped the hilt of his sword. She had finally arrived. The peerless expert who was known for doting on her only son, shielding him, being irritable, murderous, and temperamental, had finally arrived. Wu Chongbai, the only woman of the storms of the 8 directions. Her husband was called Biyanhong, also one of the storms of the 8 directions. They had an only son called Bitianxin, the only children of 2 Wind and Rain Empress. One could imagine how they grew up. Bitianxin's life had been smooth sailing until several weeks ago, when he encountered Chen Changxing and Tang 36 at the gate of the Orthodox Academy. At the time, Su Mayu had warned them that the Orthodox Academy might encounter some sort of trouble. Chen Changxing, on the other hand, was thinking that the Orthodox Academy had not done anything excessive to Bitianxin. With Wu Qiangbai's status and seniority, there was no need for her to make things difficult for him. Only now, when he saw the old Taoist nun on the other side of the lake, did he realize that not all masters were otherworldly masters with a transcendent mental state. Senior, entering the Tradition Academy at night, what can I do for you? He looked at the old Taoist nun and asked with a steady voice. He was the principal of the Orthodox Academy, the Pope's appointed successor. Purely in terms of status, he was not below her, so he said these words very calmly. The old Taoist nun indifferently asked, "You are Chen Changxing?" Ever since he left Xining and came to the capital, Chen Changxing had heard this question countless times. Sometimes it was very annoying, like when he encountered that monolith guardian in the Mausoleum of Books. Sometimes it was an honor, like when he encountered Zhu Luo outside Hanqiu City. The old Taoist nun asking this question had a status similar to Zhu Luo's on the continent, but he knew that this was not honor, but danger. The old Taoist nun had an indifferent expression, her life and death already decided. In a little while I will kill this person. As she said this, she looked at Chen Changxing and pointed at Xian Yuan Po's back. Xian Yuan Po's body slightly trembled. Under this incomparably terrifying pressure, he simply could not turn around, nor could he leave. I will also do a few things for all of you to see." The old Taoist nun did not even glance at Xian Yuanpa or the ruins in front of her. In her eyes, Xian Yuanpa was already a dead man. Tonight, she had already made arrangements for the youths of the Orthodox Academy, had decided their lives. The divine general of the great Zhou army greatly admired Jishio, so that Wolf Cub would only be heavily injured, with a broken arm or a broken leg. She would not kill Qin Changxing and Tang 36, because even someone as powerful as she did not want to offend the orthodoxy or the Wenshui Tangs. But this did not mean that she would let them go. She would cripple Jishio in front of their eyes, then slowly kill the Yao youth. She wanted them to watch as their friend's blood splattered on the spot, powerless to reverse the situation. She wanted them to understand what true helplessness, true despair was. She believed that after the fact, they would suffer even more if they were still alive than if they were already dead. This was very good. She had originally come to educate them, so she wanted to leave them with an unforgettable memory. As for whether the youths of the Orthodox Academy would resist, she had never considered this question. Everyone said that these youths were true geniuses, but so what? Let alone the proclamation of Azure Sky or the proclamation of Golden Distinction. If they were juniors like Wang Pa or Xiao Zhang, or perhaps she would take a second look. What did these youths amount to? Yes, if it were any other youth, upon sensing such a terrifying and powerful qi, especially after guessing the old Taoist nun's identity, perhaps they would give up resisting, because they were no match for her. If they were young eagles, the old Taoist nun would be the cold, high altitude. If they were young tigers, the old Taoist nun would be the bottomless abyss. But they were not other youths. They were the youths of the Orthodox Academy. In Xuanyang City, Qin Changxing dared to attack Zhu Luo. On the snowy plains, Jishio dared to bare his fangs at the demons. At the age of 3, Tang Tang dared to pee on the Tang old master's face. When they first entered the capital, Xian Yuanpa dared to fight with Tian Haier. In any case, they couldn't beat him, so they didn't fight. This was not their logic. In their view, since they couldn't beat him no matter what, they had to fight first. They couldn't beat him? So what if they couldn't beat him? If they would die, then they would seek life in death. The youths began to prepare for battle, each with their own style of battle. The walking stick lay in the shadow of the ground. Jeshio stood in the shadow of the window, his face covered in shadow, covering his blood-red eyes, his tough wolf fur, his sharp wolf claws. He calmly stared at the old Taoist nun, his right hand gripping the half-broken demon commander's banner sword, his calm and indifference causing one's heart to palpitate. Tang 36 exerted a little force with his palms, shattering the windowsill. With several strange sounds, several fireworks flew into the drifting snowy night sky. As it turned out, he had been setting up traps in the Orthodox Academy this entire time. This was his style of battle. When encountering such a terrifying enemy, he naturally had to send out a warning smoke signal at the first possible moment. The closest place was the Imperial Palace, so Xue Xingchuan would probably arrive very quickly. As for the experts that the Wenshui Tangs had sent to protect him in secret, they would be the first to appear. Of course, even if the second-rank divine General Xue Xingchuan and the guardians of the Wenshui Tangs worked together, they still wouldn't be a match for this old Taoist nun. But he didn't believe that this old Taoist nun would actually dare to kill them in front of everyone. Su Mou's face was pale. Looking at the old Taoist nun, he said in a trembling voice, "Aunt, do you really want the two families to become enemies?" Qin Changsheng looked at the old Taoist nun. He did not intend to use the 10,000 swords in his sheath or the heavenly tome monoliths, but instead gripped a letter. He knew that no matter how much he risked his life, he would still be no match for a single finger of the old Taoist nun. He could only hope that Su Li's letter would be of some use. With several extremely soft noises of annihilation, the warning fireworks that flew into the night sky did not even have the time to release their light before vanishing. Tang 36's complexion was rather unsightly. This was the first time he had encountered an expert of this level. Only now did he realize that the calculations and deductions he was familiar with regarding battle and the human heart were meaningless in front of these people. These people had already transcended the secular world. So how could they be trapped by the wisdom of the secular world? Chen Changsheng tightly gripped the letter in his hand, his heart sinking. Just at this moment, the seemingly forgotten Xian Yuan Pa, already a dead man in the old Taoist nun's eyes, suddenly moved. With extreme difficulty, he slowly turned around in the ruins, then slowly raised the metal sword in his hand. He was the closest to the academy wall, the closest to the old Taoist nun, so he could feel the qi of extinction even more clearly and bear the greatest pressure. When Chen Changsheng Zhexiu and the others had finished their preparations for battle, he was still resisting that pressure. He finally turned around and raised his sword to confront a terrifying expert like the old Taoist nun, to overcome his natural fear of death. Xian Yuanpa had used up all his courage. Just this simple action had used up all his strength and spirit. Facing the old Taoist nun, his body incessantly trembled, as if he had just recovered from a serious illness. The metal sword in his hand was the same, tottering on the verge of collapse. He had already displayed sufficient courage, but how could he fight in this state? How could he strike? For the first time, the old Taoist nun looked straight at Xian Yuanpa. Her eyes were filled with endless mockery and contempt. Logically speaking, peerless experts on the level of the storms of the 8 directions would not humiliate a junior like this. But today, she had come to humiliate the Orthodox Academy. Xian Yuanpa was a youth of the Bear tribe. He valued bravery and glory above all else. He could not endure humiliation. His face was flushed red. His somewhat immature features revealed a hint of determination. With a loud roar, he gripped the metal sword with both hands and slashed at the old Taoist nun. Several swift and fierce gusts of wind could be heard from the little tower. Zhexiu, like a gray shadow, instantly passed through the frozen lake of winter and arrived at this location. Chen Changxing's figure suddenly blurred. Using the discerning step, he brought along the bits of snow in the forest and rushed to Xian Yuanpa's back. His hands tightened, preparing to rip open the letter. Su Mo Yu's face revealed a look of determination, his hands reaching into his bosom. Tang 36 and the others were the last, their voices first. Wu Qiongbai, you asterisk 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 asterisk. The next chapter was still 8:00 p.m. Chapter 542. Normally, no matter how arrogant Tang 36 was, he wouldn't have cursed the old Taoist nun like this, because the old Taoist nun status was far too high. Even the old master of the Tang family might not have much respect for her, but he would at least be wary of her. But at this moment, he unhesitatingly cursed her, because he wanted to provoke the old Taoist nun and distract her attention, because he was so angry and afraid that he forgot to be afraid, and because Xian Yuan unexpectedly raised the sword in his hand. The Bear tribe youth that was so energetic that he ate 6 meals a day and smashed trees every day had his own fighting style. His bravery was the best in Orthodox Academy. His fighting style was different from Chen Changsheng's group. He didn't think, after being humiliated, he would fight to get rid of it, even if he had to pay with his life. But how could his sword hit the old Taoist nun? How could he win against the old Taoist nun? Based on the standards of the human cultivation world, Xian Yuanpa was already at ethereal opening, but he couldn't possibly hurt the old Taoist nun. The heavy sword was like a weak willow branch, locked in the cold wind by the lake, unable to descend. The old Taoist nun looked at the sword and seemed to recognize its origin. She raised her eyebrows in surprise, but she wasn't going to be merciful. That cold aura of death instantly took control of his body and sea of consciousness. In the next moment, it would tear him to pieces like a raging wave. With a single thought, Xian Yuanpa would die. Chen Changsheng, Zhexiu, Su Mo Yu, and Tang 36 were like 4 arrows shooting towards the lake. But even if they sacrificed their lives, they couldn't change the result. They could only watch as Xian Yuan died in front of their eyes. Was there anyone who could change all this? Perhaps. Chun Changsheng still had a last resort. He prepared to throw out that life-saving item without hesitation. Su Mo was also preparing. Tang 36 was also preparing. They were all prepared to take out their trump cards, hoping that it would give Xian Yuan a chance to survive. But at this moment, an unexpected change occurred. The sword in Xian Yuan Po's hand was trapped in the cold wind, unable to advance an inch, but it still brought with it some wind, even if it was the softest of breezes. The gentle breeze was unable to break the stillness of the lake, unable to ruffle the strands of the horsetail whisk at the old Taoist nun's waist. It could not even move the snow, but it could move the smoke and dust. Xian Yuan stood in the ruins. His feet landed on what used to be a stove, and ashes from the stove were scattered everywhere. The ashes were the embers of the firewood, and some were the ashes of a piece of paper. Previously, Xian Yuan had used his iron sword to pierce through the ashes of the burnt paper. At this moment, along with the wisp of wind brought about by his iron sword, the ashes slowly floated up. In the dim light of the night, the lakeside was very dark. That mass of gray faintly revealed a bit of red. It turned out that there were actually some sparks hidden inside. The wind swept up the ashes, and sparks danced in the air, forming a sword in the air. The sword of Mars followed the angle of the iron sword and slashed forward with a whoosh. F***CK. The space by the lake of the Orthodox Academy seemed to have been cleaved apart by this sword. The old Taoist nun's pupils constricted as she sensed a strong sense of danger. Ever since she stepped into the divine domain, she had rarely felt this way, because there were very few people on the continent that could threaten her. What was going on here? Where had that illusory sword condensed from sparks come from? Why did it make her feel danger? Countless thoughts moved with unimaginable speed through the old Taoist nun's sea of consciousness, like streams of light, as she incessantly calculated and deduced. But that sword of Mars had come so quickly that before she had even finished her deductions, it had already arrived in front of her. The old Taoist nun had no time to think. With a shrill whistle, the horsetail whisk, hanging at her side, rose up without any wind and landed in her hand. She swatted it at the sword of Mars. That horsetail whisk had thousands of threads, and each thread was like a tide. This ocean was boundless blue, but it was devoid of life, only the aura of silent extinction. She did not know where this sword of Mars that had suddenly appeared came from, but she sensed an intense danger. She attacked with her own divine Taoist technique. The horsetail whisk carried with it countless tides of silent extinction as it swatted at the sword of Mars. Compared to the frenzied waves that span the world, that illusory sword formed from gentle sparks seemed so insignificant, so frail. How could it be blocked? The sword of Mars was in front of Xian Yuan Po. If it was engulfed by the frenzied waves, Xian Yuan Po's body and soul would assuredly be devoured. Yet when that seemingly insignificant and frail sword of Mars encountered the frenzied waves stirred up by the horsetail whisk, not only was it not annihilated, it instantly began to blaze. The Orthodox Academy was instantly illuminated in a deep red. Both the nearby and far forests seemed to begin to burn. The sword borrowed the power of the fire to flaunt itself, transforming into a sword of fire around 7 feet long. It exuded an extremely powerful chi towards the night sky. Frenzied waves like mountains, slay. Silent extinction like the sea, slay. Slay all things. With a boom, the sword of fire slashed through the tens of thousands of frenzied waves, bringing with it countless strands of the horsetail whisk as it slashed at the old Taoist nun. The old Taoist nun was suddenly alarmed. With a shrill scream of extreme fear, she suddenly retreated. A section of the courtyard wall that had collapsed soundlessly earlier had completely collapsed with a loud bang as her figure retreated. The night sky was filled with the sound of space being torn apart. The massive blazing sword followed the old Taoist nun's figure as it madly chopped down. The countless strands of the horsetail whisk that had been severed drifted in the darkness. The restaurants and residences outside the walls of the Orthodox Academy loudly collapsed. The old Taoist nun's figure retreated several hundred zhang until she reached the banks of the Luo River. Only then did she manage to steady herself. The frenzied waves stirred up by her horsetail whisk were completely drenched. The calm Luo River began to surge with countless waves, the white waves incessantly rising and falling. The old Taoist nun gazed at the pursuing sword of fire, an expression of disbelief appearing on her face. She shrieked, "3 moves of the burning heaven!" At this moment, she finally recognized the origins of this sword. The sparks from the embers in the furnace formed a tiny, illusory sword. It exploded in the wind, exploding with an unimaginable might. Her horsetail whisk, her silent extinction, the boundless blue sea that filled the world, was no match for the sword. Why? Because a single spark could set a prairie ablaze, and it could also burn the heavens. This sword was naturally Su Li's 3 moves of the burning heaven. With a cry of alarm, the burning heaven sword had already reached the banks of the Luo River. The Luo River at night was no longer as tranquil as it was in the past. The snowflakes falling from the sky were instantly vaporized by this sword intent into countless clouds of smoke. From the thick layers of smoke came another heaven-shaking boom, as well as the old Taoist nun's mournful and shocked cry. The mist suddenly dispersed, and the dust gradually settled. The embankment on the banks of the Luo River had already collapsed for 3 li. The old Taoist nun stood in the shallow waters below the embankment, her right sleeve completely shredded, revealing skin as white as jade. Her black hair was in disarray, and her body was covered in rubble. The horsetail whisk in her hand was only left with the handle and a few strands of silk. She cut an abnormally sorry figure, just like her. According to the official news, the animated version of the Heaven Choosing story will appear on Tencent Video on July 15th. Friends who have not yet enjoyed the new trailer can reply to Cartoon Trailer on WeChat. In addition, the monthly book review area welfare event will be held as scheduled today. The event has a high chance of winning prizes, and the prizes include 10,000 book coins and a set of Heaven Choosing story merchandise. The new edition of the merchandise is in the pipeline. Will the old edition be out of print? Friends who are moved, do not wait any longer. For the specific rules of the event, please move to the top of the book review area. How about it? Isn't our advertising style getting more and more formal? In addition, the press conference for the Heaven Choosing cartoon should be on the 9th. Because I'm returning to my hometown to pay my respects to my ancestors, I really can't make it in time. I truly feel very regretful. Friends in Shanghai, if you have the time, please go and support us. In addition, it's almost the end of the month. This month, because of everyone's support, the monthly tickets have always been at the front, even though I've never tried to pull any votes. Thank you all. I very seriously request everyone to see if they have any monthly tickets. If they do, please vote for Heaven Choosing Story. Thank you. Chapter 543. This is impossible, the old Taoist nun shrieked. When she sensed that her Tao heart seemed to have been cut open by the burning heaven sword, she was so shocked and furious that she was about to go mad. Why did the Orthodox Academy have a strand of Su Li's sword intent? Had Su Li guessed that she would come? After confirming that the powerful sword intent was the burning heaven sword, she had been uneasily pondering this question. But what made her even more shocked, angry, and even perplexed was, why was this sword intent so powerful? It was publicly acknowledged that Su Li was the strongest expert on the path of the sword, but how could she not even be able to receive a single sword? And this was only the sword intent Su Li had left in the Orthodox Academy, not his true sword. She was no ordinary expert. She was one of the storms of the 8 directions who had stepped into the divine domain many years ago. In the past, she had always believed that although Su Li had also stepped into the divine domain, he had done so many years later. No matter how talented he was, He was not necessarily her match in terms of cultivation. But now she could not even contend against a single strand of Su Li's sword intent. After anger came panic. The old Taoist nun gazed at that terrifying sword of fire, her Tao heart naturally filled with the desire to retreat. In the past, she would definitely have continued to fight, but now that she had confirmed that she was no match for Su Li, how could she not retreat? She had hidden her husband from her infiltration into the capital and had no powerful reinforcements. More importantly, Su Li was not the Pope, nor was he the Tianhai Divine Empress. He was a cold-blooded and emotionless madman. He really did dare to kill the storms of the 8 directions. The Luo River once more surged with countless waves, piling up in the snowy night like countless scraps of paper. Just before the sword intent slashed down once more, the old Taoist nun's unwilling howl resounded through the Luo River. Her figure suddenly vanished and then reappeared on the opposite shore, vanishing into the streets and alleys of the capital as quickly as possible. With their fastest speed, Qin Changxing and the others followed the houses and restaurants that had been destroyed by the old Taoist nun. By the time they reached the shore of the Luo River, there was already no one here. There was only the fluttering snowflakes and the threads that had been cut off from the horsetail whisk, as well as the flaming sword floating in the air above the Luo River. Those threads were not willow catkins, nor were they snowflakes. Even the thinnest strand contained a terrifying might that could easily kill them. If that horsetail whisk were to strike with all its strength, it might truly be able to shake the entire Luo River. Truly worthy of being a supreme expert that had stepped into the divine domain. Feeling the power within those threads, Qin Changsheng and the others subconsciously looked towards Xian Yuan Pe, the first person who dared to attack the Taoist nun. They were filled with admiration, but at the same time they thought, how strong was this flaming sword that had chopped the horsetail whisk into a featherless chicken and forced the Taoist nun to retreat? What's going on? Tang 36 asked as he looked at the burning sword in the night sky. In the first half of the night, Chen Changxing had comprehended the sword intent on the letter and had a rough idea of what was going on. He said, "This is Senior Su Li's sword." Tang 36's lingering fear had yet to fade. He thought to himself, if not for this sword, the Orthodox Academy would have definitely flowed with rivers of blood today. Even if that old Taoist nun did make things too difficult for him, Qin Changsheng and Su Moyu for the sake of the orthodoxy, and the Wenshui Tangs, Zhixio would definitely be humiliated and Xian Yuan would have no chance of survival. This battle between experts that had been fought from the Orthodox Academy to the shores of the Luo River had alarmed many people. Not long after they arrived at the shores of the Luo River, a flame descended from the night sky. Xue Xingchuan rode over on the red cloud Qilin as fast as he could. At the same time, the 3 guardians that the Wenshui Tangs had dispatched to the capital finally appeared in the darkness, surrounding Tang 36. This was the first time Qin Changxing and the others had seen the true strength of the Wenshui Tangs, so they couldn't help but glance over curiously. A storm of hooves thundered through the streets. The Orthodoxy cavalry and the Imperial Guard were probably on their way. Xue Xingchuan gazed at the collapsed embankment of the Luo River and the ruins of the restaurants and residences. With a grim expression, he asked, "What happened?" "Wu Qiongbai has come," Tang 36 said. One of the storms of the 8 directions had actually infiltrated the capital? Xue Xingchuan's expression flickered, and then he turned to the great sword burning in the sky above the Luo River. His expression changed once more. With his level of cultivation, he could naturally tell that this was not a real sword. To be more precise, it was an illusory sword. Yet what made him wary was that, even at his level of cultivation, he felt that he was far from being a match for this sword. Thus, he didn't need to ask to know whose sword intent this was. Su Li, why would he hide this sword intent in the Orthodox Academy? He looked into Chen Changxing's eyes and asked, could it be that he knew beforehand that Wu Qiongbai would act against you? This was the matter that the old Taoist nun had least wanted to understand before her defeat. and it was also the matter that Qin Changxing still did not understand. He had originally believed that of the 2 letters that Senior Su Li had entrusted Su Yorong to give him, the one that was immediately burned after reading was to help him comprehend sword intent, and the letter in his bosom was a life-saving treasure. It now seemed that Su Li clearly had some other deeper meaning in having him burn the first letter to ashes. Only by borrowing the fire of nature to ignite the sword soul could the sword intent of the burning heaven sword display its greatest might. But how had Su Li determined when to make this sword intent appear? Was it because of Xuan Yuan's unreasonable bravery, or was it because he had truly calculated ahead of time that Wu Qiongbai would come? The Orthodoxy cavalry and the Imperial Guard rushed to the scene, as did the priests of the Li Palace, as well as the officials and servants of the capital government. People began to clean up the scene, rescue the injured, and move sand and stones to stabilize the collapsed embankment of the Luo River. The scene became lively, and the burning heaven sword in the night sky restrained its light, becoming difficult to see. Xue Xingchuan was still staring at that place in the night sky. Qin Changsheng and the others were also staring at that place. This matter seemed to be coming to an end, everything returning to normal. But was it really going to be like this? For some reason, none of them believed so. They all felt that something else was about to happen. Just as expected, in the next moment, in the most unreasonable of moments, the night sky over the Luo River began to burn. It was as if countless golden crows had flown out of the sun and descended into the mortal world. Everywhere was incomparably bright, and the capital seemed to have transformed from night to day. The officials and soldiers, laboriously working on the ruins and embankment, raised their heads in shock, thinking what happened. The burning heaven sword burned and grew larger. In the space of a few breaths, it had traversed the night sky. From the ground, it was at least half the length of a street. The officials and soldiers on the banks of the Luo River, as well as the awakened populace, stared at the massive sword burning in the night sky and let out countless cries of alarm. The burning heaven sword fiercely burned. No more snowflakes fell from the clouds. No more rain, not even mist. The clouds in the night sky had been cleanly burned away by the fire, gradually revealing the vast sky of stars behind them. Xue Xingchuan's face instantly paled beyond compare. He gave a shrill howl in the direction of the Imperial Palace as a warning. At the same time, he leapt onto the back of the red cloud Qilin and flew into the night sky. Qin Changsheng had also guessed at this, and his eyes brimmed with shock. He thought, "It can't be, Senior. You're about to leave, so why are you still going crazy?" The old Taoist nun could not understand why Su Li had left a strand of sword intent in the Orthodox Academy. Xue Xingchuan could not understand, and neither could Qin Changsheng. This was because no matter how high Su Li's cultivation in the path of the sword was, even if he could use his sword to calculate the heart of the heavens, it was still impossible for him to predict the movements of an expert of the divine domain, and thus lay in ambush ahead of time. The strand of sword intent that Su Li had left in the Orthodox Academy had never been prepared for the old Taoist nun. He had left 7 letters for the world, and the one that Qin Changsheng had immediately burned after reading had the strongest sword intent. The old Taoist nun had come to the Orthodox Academy, and Xian Yuan Po's metal sword had awakened the sword intent in that ball of ash. As a result, that sword intent had conveniently pushed back the old Taoist nun. Yes, conveniently. It was only conveniently done. Even if the old Taoist nun was one of the storms of the 8 directions, she still did not have the qualifications to make Su Li specifically use this sword intent. He did not care about her in the slightest. The person he wanted to fight, the target of the strongest sword intent, had always been that person. That person was in the Imperial Palace, had always been in the Imperial Palace. That person was no ordinary person, but a saint. A clear whistle resounded through the night sky. Xue Xingchuan rode the red cloud Qilin into the sky, transforming into a streak of fire as he thrust his spear at the burning heaven sword. Yet His spear was simply incapable of piercing the burning heaven sword. It was obstructed on the outside, and the wind howled as the streak of fire was abruptly severed, causing it to descend to the ground. Xue Xingchuan and the red cloud Qilin were jolted into the Luo River, a mouthful of blood spurting from his mouth. The massive blazing sword finally moved, carrying with it countless flames and heat. It soared into the sky from the Luo River, heading for the imperial palace. Seeing this incomparably magnificent sight, everyone on the ground was so shocked that they couldn't make a sound. The eyes of Chen Changxing, Tang 36, and the others were brimming with reverence and admiration. If a cultivator of the Tao could reach this level, would they have any regrets? Zheshio's face was expressionless, but his eyes were filled with fanaticism and determination. He thought to himself, no matter how strong you are, there will be a day when I will defeat you. After the beginning of winter, the snow in the capital continued to fall intermittently, but the clouds in the sky rarely dispersed. It was not until tonight that the sword intent transformed into a massive sword that burned the heavens and spat out endless light and heat into the world. The snowy clouds were instantly burned away, revealing specks of stars. As the burning heaven sword headed for the imperial palace, the snowy clouds in the night sky scattered, and stars constantly appeared. It was a very beautiful sight, like the tip of a brush painting the night sky. Countless stars incessantly shone along with the sword. The incessantly bright stars in the night sky did not sprinkle their starlight upon the mortal world, but fell upon the trajectory of the burning heaven sword, transforming into countless bright scales. The burning heaven sword had finally become a dragon. The entire capital finally woke up at this moment. Some people had not slept the entire time. When the old Taoist nun walked through that alley, the Tianhai Divine Empress woke up. She then ascended the steps and ascended the dew platform. This was the highest place in the capital besides the Mausoleum of Books. One could see the nearest starry sky, and one could also see the vastness of the mortal world. She watched as the old Taoist nun appeared outside the Orthodox Academy, her expression indifferent. She watched as a powerful sword intent appeared in the Orthodox Academy, her expression still indifferent. She only raised her brows, apparently somewhat interested. Now, that sword was traveling from the Luo River to the imperial palace. She stood on the dew platform, the fierce winds brushing against her perfect face, unable to disperse her indifferent expression, only causing her black hair to drift in the wind. Her hands held behind her, she stared at the approaching sword dragon in the night sky. Her expression was calm, but a hint of graveness finally appeared in her eyes. Today there will be no more. In a little while, I will post an interview on my official WeChat account. It will be a chat with teacher Xiao Yanjun. The main reason is because of the Tencent Academy Award ceremony I mentioned last time. Posting this truly is a bit of self-boasting and shameful, but I feel that this interview contains many of my true thoughts. I want everyone to know what I think about writing books and a few other things. I want to be able to live together with everyone even more shamelessly for many more years. If everyone is interested, then go and take a look. Chapter 544. She took a step forward and arrived at the very edge of the dew platform. The night pearl and the human world were beneath her feet, the starry sky and fate above her head. She slowly spread out her hands, her wide sleeves falling down and dancing in the wind. She seemed to be standing before an abyss, cautious and careful. She seemed to be standing before a vast ocean, a majestic sight. An extremely profound and powerful aura appeared on the dew platform. With a slight shake of her wide sleeves, the night wind suddenly changed direction, moving against the wind and heading towards the burning heaven sword. Strands of black hair brushed against her face and drifted forward, slightly disheveled, adding to her beauty. Her hair trembled, and the ebony hairpin stuck in her hair fell down, but it did not fall. Instead, it flew into the night sky. Everyone knew that the Divine Empress had an ebony hairpin. No matter the time, it would always be stuck in her hair. It was not because the hairpin was very beautiful, the lifelike carving of the phoenix head, but because it was no ordinary hairpin. It was the third ranked on the tier of legendary weapons, the wooden sword Little Phoenix, an extremely beautiful and incomparably solemn phoenix. Cry resounded through the entire capital. The ebony hairpin flew from the dew platform into the night sky. Following the starlight, it transformed into a graceful and beautiful black phoenix that was incomparably berserk. This black phoenix was so massive that it seemed capable of obscuring all the stars. It extended a claw and clawed at the blazing, burning heaven sword. A terrifying sound reverberated endlessly between the heavens and the earth. The black phoenix's right claw directly gripped the fire dragon formed from the burning heaven sword. The dragon-scaled starlight around the burning heaven sword suddenly dimmed, and then, accompanied by countless tiny cracks, it began to shatter into pieces. But the burning heaven sword seemed to have long since predicted this and directly pierced through those starlight scales. Su Li's sword was truly unsheathed. An extremely sharp sword intent covered the entire night sky. Those scattered starlight were actually cut into even finer pieces, drifting down like snowflakes. Several black feathers flew into the air. A phoenix cry resounded once more, but this time it was even more tyrannical and matchless. The black phoenix unfurled its 10-some li-long wings. The burning heaven sword stabbed into its black feathers, and its sharp beak fiercely struck the burning heaven sword's head. A stream of light shone, and then countless streams of light shone, overflowing with brilliant colors. It was indescribably magnificent. The night sky was illuminated, and the world once more entered daytime. From the imperial palace to the heavenly Tao Academy, from the imperial court to the Li Palace, the protective arrays of countless buildings were stimulated by the collision of qi high up in the sky and automatically unfurled. Countless rings of clear light condensed into rings of light, almost simultaneously appearing in the streets and alleys of the capital. This scene was really too beautiful, so beautiful that it was dazzling, making people unable to look at it directly. In fact, there were indeed not many people who could see it. The stone pillars surrounding the Li Palace exuded an ancient qi. In the deepest part of the palace, the Pope quietly gazed at the night sky cut open by the courtyard, gazed at the massive blazing sword and the black phoenix that he had not seen for a very long time, and gave a long sigh that was difficult to understand. The forest of the mausoleum of books released an even more ancient qi. The aged divine general in the pavilion at the bottom of the divine path slowly raised his head, the dust of history slowly drifting away from his armor. Even he who had a lonely heart and a lonely Tao had been shaken by tonight's battle. After an unknown amount of time, the flowing light in the night sky finally faded away. The thunder-like clashing qis in the sky also gradually disappeared. The snowy clouds in the surroundings slowly gathered, once more obscuring the shattered starlight. The capital once more returned to night, and the world once more grew quiet. People stood by the windows of their homes, stood in the ruins, stood by the banks of the Luo River, rubbed their stinging eyes, and once more gazed at the night sky. There was nothing in the night sky. There was no massive blazing sword, no black phoenix. All the strange phenomena had already vanished, as if nothing had ever happened. Those magnificent scenes seemed to have been imagined. Snow began to fall once more, slowly dancing in the cold wind. Chun Chongxing extended a palm and took a piece of snow. He realized that the color of the snow was not white but gray. The people of the capital all realized that the snow falling from the night sky was actually gray, because the sword that had descended upon the capital through the night sky had originally been a piece of paper that had been burned to ash. The divine empress gazed at the ebony phoenix hairpin in her right hand and said nothing, her thoughts inscrutable. The wind on the dew platform blew away the gray snow stuck to the hairpin, revealing the hairpin's body. The dark red phoenix head on the hairpin was still as noble and beautiful as before, but if one looked carefully, one could see that a shallow sword scar had been added to the hairpin. The hairpin had originally had a shallow blade scar, and now that a sword scar had been added to it, it was not very obvious. Only she knew that this meant that Su Li was already infinitely close to the person who had left that blade scar on her hairpin. Tonight's battle was a draw. The sword intent left behind by Su Li was actually able to resist her hairpin. This was rather surprising to her. After a moment, the corners of her lips perked up, revealing a mocking smile. Don't want to leave, but have no choice but to leave. Those who are trapped by love are all mediocre. Even if the path of the sword is stronger, what can it do? She suddenly sensed something and turned to a certain place in the south of the city. Her brows perked up as she coldly said, "He actually still dares to stay. Truly a thing that doesn't know life from death." There were many people who did not want to leave, such as that old Taoist nun. She had gone to the Orthodox Academy to establish her might and kill people, but in the end, she had been forced back by Su Li's sword intent. Battered and exhausted, she had borrowed the darkness to flee. As one of the storms of the 8 directions, how could she be willing? So she had not truly left. She had borrowed the array of some noble residents in the south of the city to conceal her chi. Then she saw that battle in the night sky, standing in the quiet garden, watching the gradually fading streams of light, thinking of that massive blazing sword and that black phoenix. The old Taoist nun's complexion became abnormally unsightly. Tianhai's strength had actually reached such a high level. Could it be that the saints were all concealing their true level and were a level higher than people like her? But when had Su Li raised his cultivation to this level? After watching this battle, she was forced to admit that she was still very far from Tianhai and Su Li, and it was even highly likely that she would never be able to catch up to them in this lifetime. This fact made her feel a great sense of defeat, and then she became more and more angry, so angry that she wanted to kill people. She had not left the capital just now precisely because she wanted to kill people. Su Li's sword intent had already been shattered by the hairpin. Presumably, no one could have imagined that someone of her status and cultivation would so treacherously go to the Orthodox Academy to kill people again. Who could stop her? A venomous killing intent appeared in her eyes, and a boundless sea of ice roiled like ink. She took her almost completely bald horsetail whisk and walked towards the Orthodox Academy, her face brimming with killing intent. But just as she began to walk, a voice resounded in her ear. "I've always believed that fate is a very unreasonable thing, and I've obtained the best proof of this on your body. How could a wretched and despicable old woman like you obtain the favor of the starry sky and enter the divine domain?" This voice was very cold, very dignified. At the same time, a cold and dignified gaze descended from a very high place and fell upon the old Taoist nun. The next chapter was to be issued at 9 in the evening. Chapter 545. Upon hearing this, the old Taoist nun's expression suddenly changed. She raised her head in the direction of the dew platform and opened her mouth, wanting to say something. The Tianhai Divine Empress stood at the edge of the dew platform, her expression gazing at the southern estate. Her gaze was extremely dignified, like a real ray of light. From the moment the old Taoist nun entered the capital, she had sensed it. In the alley, the old Taoist nun had tortured a dog to death and severed Guan Bai's sword-wielding hand, which had already offended her. Perhaps in the view of many people, both that wild dog and Guan Bai were not worth mentioning when compared to the old Taoist nun. But the Divine Empress did not think this way, because this was her world. Under the blue sky, even the most festering wild dog was still her dog. Even the most unimportant person was still her people. Of course, if the old Taoist nun had obediently retreated after being forced back by Su Li's sword intent, she would have given face to the old Taoist nun's husband and not appeared. But the old Taoist nun should not have remained in the capital. This was disrespect to her. The old Taoist nun especially should not have remained in that estate. This was an exploitation of her prestige. The Divine Empress did not like it, so she did not want to hear the old Taoist nun's explanation. Scram, she impassively said. With this word, the jade rui at her waist suddenly transformed into a stream of light, flying towards the distant southern part of the city. The jade rui transformed into a black dragon, carrying with it the power of wind and lightning. Yet it was noiseless, seeming to fuse with the darkness. In the entire capital, only 2 or 3 people could sense the appearance of this black dragon. Deep beneath New North Bridge, that little girl, her face brimming with fiendish intent, was currently eating the roast chicken that Chen Changxing had sent over a few days ago. At the same time, she was softly complaining that it had been many days since he had come to see her. At the same time, she was filled with the hope that she could learn the Mount Li sword style from him. In the future, if she could cultivate to Su Li's level, how could the chains on her back still hold her? Suddenly, she raised her head and frowned, a hint of fear appearing on her small face. Under the cover of the darkness, the black dragon, transformed from the jade rui, arrived in the southern part of the city. The word scram exploded in the old Taoist nun's ears like thunder. Her expression suddenly changed, and she no longer hesitated. Turning, she left. At the same time, her horsetail whisk descended, forming layers of jade sea behind her. With a whoosh, the jade rui arrived in the secluded garden, breaking through the horsetail whisk and entering. The black dragon entered the sea and set off countless storms. With a bang, the old Taoist nun's back was struck. Her clothes were torn to shreds, and she spat out a mouthful of true blood. How could she dare to stay any longer? Forcefully supporting her heavily injured body, she used a secret technique and leaped into the night, disappearing from sight. After a while, a torch was lit in the quiet garden. Tian Haichenwu and several of his most important nephews and nephews stood under the garden wall, their complexions extremely ugly. The old Taoist nun's true blood remained on the walls and bamboos, mottled and suffused with golden light. Aunt is angry. It's not like we're thinking of killing Qin Changsheng. We're just thinking of dampening the orthodoxy's arrogance. Her ladyship doesn't even allow this. What does she want us to do? The Pope sat on his chair, gazing at the green leaf in the pot that was growing stronger and stronger, thinking about tonight's events. After a few moments of absent-mindedness, he muttered to himself, "Senior brother, your judgment back then was correct. She truly is stronger than everyone imagined, and I think this is still not her strongest." Besides powerful figures like the Pope and the old Taoist nun in tonight's battle in the capital, besides Su Li's display of his world-shaking cultivation on the path of the sword, the most important event for many people was the sight of that tyrannical and peerless Black Phoenix. At this moment, everyone finally confirmed that the Divine Empress truly was as rumored, possessing the extremely noble Heavenly Phoenix bloodline. It was no wonder that she doted on Su Yurong so much. From the perspective of innate talent and bloodline, she truly could treat Su Yurong as her true daughter. Only a few people knew that before and after this heaven-shaking battle between the Divine Empress and Su Li, 2 other battles had taken place in the capital. In normal times, these 2 battles in the divine domain would assuredly incite countless discussions in the world. But tonight, these 2 battles would inevitably become inconspicuous footnotes. No one knew that one of the storms of the 8 directions, Wu Qiongbai, had once infiltrated the capital in the middle of the night, wanting to go to the Orthodox Academy to help her beloved only son regain some face. In the end, she had been repeatedly suppressed by Su Li and the Divine Empress, 2 legends. Not only had she failed to regain any face, she had instead been heavily injured and left in an incomparably miserable state. It didn't take long for the 7 letters Su Li had left for the continent to finally be known. The Myriad Willows Garden outside Hanqiu City had been burned to the ground. It was truly impossible to conceal this matter, and the Zhu clan of Tianliang County and the emotion-severing sect suddenly became much more low-key. At the same time, the longevity sect's Elder Liang suddenly died of an illness, and 2 more elders were afflicted with serious illnesses. Thus, The first generation of experts that had survived that upheaval 10 years ago withered away. The longevity sect announced to the world that it had immediately secluded itself for 3 years. Even the imminent confluence of the North and South was to remain uninvolved, no longer expressing any opinion. In such a short period of time, so many major events had occurred. Everyone knew that this was assuredly related to Su Li. What truly shocked the entire world was naturally the battle between Su Li and the Tianhai Divine Empress on that snowy night in the capital. When the news that Su Li had accompanied the Holy Maiden in seclusion had first arrived, many Southerners believed that he had been unable to resist the pressure of the people of Zhou and had thus become a deserter. However deep their love had been, how deep their hatred was now. This was especially the case when those youths of the South who had once idolized and mentioned him. Their words were filled with disrespect and incomparable hatred. However, Su Li was still Su Li. As the tallest and most towering tree in the South in the last several hundred years, how could he have left because he wanted to escape? How could he have left so calmly, silently, inconspicuously, and even somewhat aggrieved? Before leaving, he had to settle all his grudges. He had once cold-blooded and mercilessly killed many people. The world had many reasons to hate him, but he did not have too many places in the world that he needed to hate. Looking back over the past few years, only the humiliation and injuries he had suffered on his journey south from the snowy plains of the land of demons had not been washed clean. Those shameless people who had stirred up internal strife in Mount Li were still alive, so the Myriad Willows garden had been burned down, Zhu Luo had been crippled, and the longevity sect had gradually disappeared into the long river of history. As for the word grudge in front, it was naturally settled by the letter in Chen Chongqing's bosom, the sudden gift of tens of thousands of acres of fertile land to Scholatry Manor, and the amnesty personally issued by a famous assassin by the Tianhai Divine Empress. Of course, in his final moments, he did not forget to do something that he had actually always wanted to do, but never had the chance to do. A true contest with the Tianhai Divine Empress. Many years ago, when Su Li was still very young, he was already the world's chief assassin on the ranking of assassins. Countless people had been willing to spend countless sums of money, even a province or a county, to hire him to assassinate the Tianhai Divine Empress. But he had never accepted, not even hesitating to part ways with his subordinates. After a few years, he had already become the most senior martial granduncle in the Mount Li sword sect. The Chen imperial clan, many important figures of the South, and even the elders of his hometown, had put on countless pretexts of righteousness, words of sincerity, and even tears streaming down his face, requesting him to take his sword and enter the capital to eliminate the scourge that was the demon empress for the people of the world. But he had still not agreed. 10 years ago, the longevity sect and the Liang household had worked together to capture his pregnant wife and force him to kill Tianhai, but he had still not done so. It was not because he did not have his current level of cultivation in the path of the sword and did not have the confidence to challenge a true saint, nor was it because he did not want the current situation to be in turmoil and the human world to fall into internal strife, thus giving the demon army a chance to invade the south. It was because at that time it was others who wanted him to challenge Tianhai. Su Li had this sort of personality. If someone wanted him to do something, the more he would not do it. Now that he was about to leave this world, no one would dare to order him to do anything, nor would anyone dare to bother him. On the contrary, he dearly wanted to test just who was stronger between him and Tianhai. The final result was no result, but he was confident that he would be very satisfied. When he left this world, Su Li made it very lively for a period of time. At his core, he was a very lively person. He was very worried that a world without him would be too boring. Perhaps he was also very worried that after he left this world, it would be a very long time before he could see so much liveliness. When he ascended the stage of this world, he was incomparably glorious, shockingly talented, dazzling to the extreme. When he left this world, he was similarly vigorous and elegant. He was confident that this world would never be able to forget his name, even if he might not appear for a very long time. He had another goal in doing this, to establish might for Mount Lee, for the Southerners. The burning heavens sword illuminated the capital, illuminating the night sky together with the wooden phoenix sword. He was telling the Tianhai divine empress and the Pope that after the confluence of the North and South, they had to treat the Southerners a little better. At the same time, he was telling the entire continent not to take advantage of his absence and try to do anything to Mount Lee. Otherwise, all of you will die a very ugly death like that elder of the longevity sect, your homes and mountain gates burned to the ground like the myriad willows garden. All of this, tomorrow's chapter above. Chapter 546. Su Li had left, but life still continued. That grand undertaking of the human world was still methodically advancing. In truth, it was precisely because Su Li had left that there was a chance of success for that grand undertaking, that it could continue. On the 17th day after Su Yurong brought the Holy Maiden Peak faction to the capital, the Qiushan clan head and the representatives of the noble clans of the south also entered the great Zhou dynasty. The longevity sect had been closed for 3 years, and the many sects and sects nominally subordinate to the sect had sent out capable representatives. In the following period of time, more and more representatives of the southern powers sat at the negotiating table. The confluence of North and South was no longer a term that existed only in ancient records and imagination. It was getting closer and closer to reality. To the Southerners, the greatest problem they faced was that with the departure of Su Li and the Holy Maiden, they no longer had an expert of the divine domain. Whether it was at the negotiating table or elsewhere, like the table of wine, they would always seem somewhat lacking in confidence. Unexpectedly, whether it was the great Zhou imperial court or the orthodoxy, they did not use this change in strength to make any unreasonable demands. On the contrary, they displayed an extremely rare magnanimity and openness, making a series of guarantees and promises for the future benefits of the Southerners. Only those truly intelligent people could see the confrontation hidden behind the negotiations, or perhaps before them. It was a confrontation between Su Li and the Tianhai divine empress and the Pope. With unimaginable wisdom and courage, he had renounced his right to retaliate against those who had tried to kill him on the journey south and left with the Holy Maiden, causing the South to lose all confidence. Thus, this negotiation would never again have the chance to sink into the quagmire that had repeated itself countless times before. Thus, the divine empress and the Pope had to give him a corresponding reward, to give the South abnormally generous conditions. This reward or generous treatment was reflected in the details of the negotiations. After the confluence of North and South, the South would do its utmost to preserve its independence. This sort of independence had already surpassed the best imaginations of the Southern powers. There was no need to change counties, no need to merge provinces and counties. The local officials could be chosen on their own, and there was no need for the capital's Ministry of Appointments to prove them. They only needed to enter the capital every 3 years to be examined. They were also given preferential treatment in terms of taxes, and in terms of the transfer of funds from the national treasury. They were greatly biased towards the poorer and weaker counties in the South. Apart from this, the South had also gained many benefits, especially the Grand Examination and the Imperial Examination. From now on, the South no longer had to rely on the capital to allocate a portion of the Grand Examination. Instead, like the other provinces and counties, the quota was determined based on the number of registered residents. With the South's recent performance, this would give them a huge advantage in the Grand Examination. Of course, it was impossible for the Southerners to only benefit and not give anything in return. The negotiations were still far from over, and a few matters had already been confirmed. In the future, the army and external affairs would be under the unified management of the capital. The greatest change took place in the northern frontier of the snowy plains that stretched for tens of thousands of li. In the past, the sects and noble clans of the south would also send experts to join the northern fortresses to resist the demon army. But they were all guest officials who listened to orders but did not obey orders. Now, however, these experts would directly join the army, and with the addition of logistical support and other changes, it was likely that the strength of the human army would greatly increase in a very short period of time. And this had always been the most important, perhaps even the only, goal of the confluence of North and South. As the negotiations for the unification of the North and South gradually progressed toward success, the experts and armies of the human world also increased their vigilance towards the North. Rations and supplies from the South were continuously transported to 11 important border passes, ready to deal a heavy blow to the demon cavalry heading south at any moment. This was because it was very clear that the demon race would not just watch as the human world's unification of the North and South succeeded. They would definitely do something, especially that extremely treacherous military advisor Black Robe. Perhaps he had already begun to carry out his crafty schemes. The situation in the North was a bit tense, and the two sides of the negotiation table in the capital were also a bit tense, but the tense mood was different. Su Yurong played an extremely important role in the confluence of North and South. It could even be said that on the spiritual level, she was the most important representative because she was a Zhou citizen and also the saintess of the South. Naturally, her schedule also became busy. She constantly summoned representatives of the forces in the South, and at the same time communicated with the Zhou imperial court. Fortunately, she lived in the royal palace, so it was very convenient for her to meet the divine queen. Qin Changsheng hadn't seen her for more than 10 days. He missed her a bit, but he knew that she was doing something extremely important, so he obviously wouldn't have any complaints. As a person who treasured time the most, he didn't waste his time on missing her or waiting. He used the cold of the deep winter to continuously polish his spirit, perceive the 5 stone pearls, silently memorize the having blade technique, and occasionally give lessons to the freshmen of the Tradition Academy. Most of the time, he was still constantly studying, but of course, he didn't forget some other important matters. On a normal winter day, with wind and snow, he bought a large amount of food and trinkets from the street market. He held up the yellow paper umbrella and avoided the countless eyes around the Tradition Academy. Under the eyes of the royal guards, he walked to the tree outside of the palace wall. Then, while the wind was blowing and the snow was blinding his eyes, he jumped into the well at New North Bridge. The most oil-absorbent paper was spread on the ground, taking up half the size of a house. Countless types of hot food were neatly arranged on top, giving off the same steam and different fragrances. There was steamed deer tail, roasted goose, roasted duck, and a dozen or so skewers of rice dumplings. But this time there was no steamed bear paw, because of Xian Yuan Pa, no one in the Tradition Academy currently ate that. Qin Changsheng used 2 fingers to pull out a clean handkerchief from his sleeve, carefully wiping off the oil and water on his hand. He raised his head and looked at the black dragon, saying, "Tang Tang turned Clear Lake Restaurant into the Tradition Academy's dining hall. I forgot to tell you, but besides blue lobster, I still bought everything else from outside. I feel like they taste better." In the middle of the floor full of food, there was a small mountain of blue lobster. When Chen Changsheng said these words, he was smiling. His smile was very clean, containing a joy that came from his heart. To be able to make so many good things for the black dragon to eat, he really felt very satisfied. The black dragon's mountainous body slowly descended. An indescribably cold aura instantly suppressed the steam emitted by the food. Chen Changsheng hurriedly unsheathed his sword and slashed. A sword intent, faintly imbued with the glow of fire, pierced through the air. The food was instantly heated up, not frozen into ice. He used the burning heaven sword. A few nights ago, he had comprehended the sword intent in that letter for a very long time. Afterwards, he saw Su Li's burning heaven sword and the divine empress ebony phoenix hairpin battle, so he had improved somewhat. Although his current path of the sword could not be said to have reached great heights in his current level of cultivation, it could already be called incomparably perfect. But using the burning heaven sword, which was extremely difficult to completely comprehend, to heat up the food, no matter how one looked at it, seemed somewhat inappropriate. The black dragon did not think so. She felt that it was extremely appropriate. She was very satisfied with the floor full of food and the small mountain of blue lobster that Chen Chongsheng had spent so much effort to prepare. She was even more satisfied with Chen Chongsheng's method of using the burning heaven sword to heat up the food, because this meant that in his eyes, letting her eat fresh and hot food was much more important than maintaining the so-called dignity of the path of the sword. She decided to forgive him for not coming here to see her for almost a month. A dignified and distant, simple yet incomparably complex dragon cry resounded through the gloomy and cold underground. Qin Chongsheng was slightly taken aback. He did not understand why the black dragon was not in a hurry to eat, but wanted him to first attend the dragon language lessons. But then he suddenly remembered that he had already delivered food to the black dragon so many times, but he had seemingly never seen her eat anything in front of him. Woo, hew! From time to time, the black dragon's low and dignified dragon cry would rise up from underground. Chun Chongsheng clumsily and earnestly learned to speak. Chun Chongsheng was extremely focused on learning. Even when his voice was hoarse, his sea of consciousness was empty, and his body was extremely weak. But he did not forget to every so often he would slash down with the burning heaven sword at his side, helping the roast goose and roast duck maintain their original fragrance at the most appropriate temperature. The black dragon's whiskers would also occasionally float up, sprinkling down snowflakes that landed on the small mountain of blue lobsters. It was a very beautiful sight. After some time, today's dragon language lessons finally came to an end. The black dragon lightly exhaled at his face, and a layer of frost instantly appeared on his face. He stretched out his hand and rubbed away the frost. He only felt a wave of coldness, and his mind was refreshed. All his exhaustion instantly vanished without a trace. I'll go over there and take a look. Chun Chongsheng didn't forget the most important thing. He flew backwards and saw the 2 iron chains. The other end of the chains was on the stone wall, held in the hands of those 2 legendary divine generals. Compared to the black dragon's mountainous body, these 2 chains were like 2 strands of hair, yet they were able to firmly lock the black dragon in place. Presumably, in the past several hundred years, the black dragon had tried countless methods to break these 2 chains, but to no avail. In the half a year since returning to the capital from the Garden of Zhou, Qin Chongsheng had thought of many methods, but they had all failed. The array that Wang Jitsa had laid down on the stone wall was far too complex and wondrous, like a sea of stars. The 2 divine generals, Yu Gong and Qin Zhong, had attached strands of spiritual sense to the stone wall. They were far too powerful and violent, like lightning. It had been almost 1,000 years since the last time the wildflowers had bloomed, but those legends were still legends. Even if they had already transformed into strands of heroic souls, they were still not existences that the current hymn could contend against. It was not even a domain that the current hymn could touch. That domain was called the divine. Chun Chongsheng sat at the bottom of the stone wall, quietly reading the book in his hands under the gazes of these legends. The book he was reading was rather old. Its name was Illustrated Notes on the Array of the Reverend Shiyang. No one knew the exact lineage of Wang, Jitsa's teacher. Back then, that ordinary teacher of the Heavenly Tao Academy had suddenly become a star that illuminated the capital in his middle age, his name shaking the continent. No one knew who his teacher was. He had flipped through several hundred books in the library of the Orthodox Academy, and in Wang Jitsa's hometown he had found an ordinary Taoist priest surnamed Wu. Wang Jitsa's hometown was Xi'an. That Taoist priest surnamed Wu was the Reverend Shiyang. The next chapter, 8 p.m., Chapter 547. The ordinary Taoist priest with the surname Wu was not famous at all. He had only written 3 books in his life, and one of them was the book on array diagrams. In the beginning, Chen Chongsheng only glanced at it casually and didn't have much hope, but the more he looked, the more he felt something was off. The arrays that Taoists who had recorded in their ray atlas were all very simple, even a little clumsy. For those who had cultivated the way, they were completely worthless. But on a few of the pages, Qin Chang Sheng could faintly see traces of the boiling stone forest array. Time passed by slowly. Qin Chang Sheng continued to read. He didn't have a trace of anxiety or irritation. His eyes were calm and determined. He had promised the Black Dragon that he would save her, so he would definitely do it. Not this year, not next year, but 1 year he would be able to do it. He firmly believed that the Black Dragon would not be imprisoned underground for another few centuries. Of course, all of this was based on the premise that he could live past the age of 20. A few nights ago, I saw a burning sword. It was very powerful. A cold and crisp voice rang out behind him. At some point, the Black Dragon had noiselessly floated behind him. When it mentioned the blazing sword, a hint of fear flashed through its eyes. That is, Su Li's sword? Qin Changxing had already confirmed the Black Dragon's gender and had heard her voice before, but he still wasn't used to it. In the 10,000 li journey south, because the Black Dragon had helped him suppress his injuries in the Garden of Zhou, it had consumed too much of its soul and spent the vast majority of its time sleeping. However, it had to be admitted that there was another important reason why it was not willing to wake up. It did not want to be discovered by Su Li. At that time, Su Li was heavily injured, not even comparable to an ordinary person. The Black Dragon still instinctively feared him. At the very beginning, in the hot springs of the snowy mountains, she had sensed that Su Li's sword had once slain many of her clansmen, even clansmen stronger than her. Senior Su Li and the Divine Empress fought. The final result should be a draw, right? What about you? You haven't come to see me for so many days. You must be very busy. What are you busy with? I'm looking for books related to formations. Qin Chang Sheng glanced at the portraits of the 2 divine generals on the stone wall and continued. Other times, I'm preparing for a battle. You are the next pope. Who dares to challenge you? So many people. You don't have to fight them. That person won't do. Who? Su Yorong. Your fiancé? For some reason, the Black Dragon's voice had become indifferent, its tone much less fluctuating. Qin Chang Xing didn't notice this and said, I don't know if she's still my fiancé. A complicated look flashed through the Black Dragon's eyes. Tell me about it. After hesitating for a moment, Qin Chang Sheng told the Black Dragon everything that had happened in the past few days. No matter if it was before or after the Bridge of Helplessness, or after that snowy night when he entered the palace, he didn't even hide the tiniest of emotions in his heart. This was the first time he told Tang 36 about what happened between him and Su Yurong. Even though he told Tang 36 about it, he never told him the details. The reason why he didn't hide anything from the Black Dragon was because the Black Dragon had saved his life many times. He trusted the Black Dragon very much. Even though he knew that the Black Dragon had a long lifespan and this Black Dragon had just entered puberty, it had lived for hundreds of years. He would subconsciously treat the Black Dragon as a respected elder. In short, he trusted the Black Dragon very much and felt it was very convenient. So he told the Black Dragon everything without leaving out any details. The underground space was quiet. A layer of frost suddenly appeared on the stone wall, covering the faces of the 2 legendary divine generals. The Black Dragon floated down. Its jet-black eyes reflected Qin Changsheng's figure. It then slowly opened its mouth. In the recent few visits to New North Bridge, whenever Qin Changsheng was studying the formation and thinking of a method to help the Black Dragon escape, to the point of being both mentally and physically exhausted, the Black Dragon would lower its noble head and spit out a light and refreshing dragon breath, helping Qin Changsheng dispel his fatigue and recover his spirit, just like before. Qin Changsheng was already used to this. Seeing the Black Dragon's actions, he naturally closed his eyes and prepared to welcome the coldness of the Black Dragon. A wu, A low and stern dragon's roar resounded. A dragon breath fell upon Qin Changsheng's face and body. It wasn't the coldness of the black frost dragon, but the true dragon breath of the black frost dragon. In an instant, Qin Changsheng's body was frozen, becoming a transparent block of ice. The water lightly lapped against the block of ice, creating a splashing sound. This wasn't the Luo River, but rather the small pond within the imperial palace. Because of the formation, the imperial palace was like spring all year round. Although the pond was small, it wasn't frozen. To Qin Changsheng, this was both a good and bad thing. A massive, transparent block of ice was constantly bobbing up and down in the pond. He was frozen within the block of ice. The reason why the pond wasn't frozen was a good thing was because under the washing of the water, the block of ice would quickly melt. The reason why it wasn't a good thing was because the pond was constantly swaying and the block of ice was sinking uneasily, occasionally rolling about. He was very uncomfortable and very embarrassed inside. The feeling of embarrassment would usually only occur when one was in an embarrassing situation and was seen by others. If no one was watching, it didn't matter if you were like Tang 36, hugging a tree in the snowy forest and burping, or if you were like him right now, being frozen in the block of ice and floating up and down with the waves. It didn't matter. Qin Changsheng felt very embarrassed right now because someone was constantly watching him. Accurately speaking, it wasn't a person. The black goat stood beside the pond, slightly tilting its head, watching him in the block of ice in the pond. It had already watched for a very long time and seemed to find this very interesting. It actually didn't leave. As a result, Qin Changsheng felt more and more embarrassed. If he could break the block of ice right now, he obviously would have done it long ago, but the black frost dragon's breath was indeed extraordinary. It directly froze his sea of consciousness and body. Even though he had completely mastered the burning heaven sword and could condense sword essence into flames, he still couldn't break the block of ice around him. He used a very long time and could only barely melt the thin layer of ice on his face. He could barely open his eyes. Time passed slowly. The block of ice continued to float up and down. The black goat continued to watch with interest, as if it didn't understand what he was doing. Or was he practicing some sort of Tao technique? The ice in front of Qin Changsheng's face melted more and more. After opening his eyes, he could finally open his mouth. He hurriedly shouted to the black goat, "Please help me." Because of this shout, the ice water flowed into his mouth and nose, choking him uncomfortably. Although the voice was very weak, the black goat understood the shape of his mouth. Just like every time in the past 2 years, whenever Qin Changsheng needed help, the black goat would always respond to his request. The black goat slowly walked into the pond and used its horn to push the large block of ice back onto the stone steps. It then lowered its head and exerted a little force. A crisp crack could be heard. The block of ice split open and Qin Changsheng fell down. His entire body was drenched by the ice water. He was frozen to an extremely miserable state. His face was pale. His ethereal palace and sea of consciousness were both invaded by the cold. He had actually suffered significant internal injuries. A trace of fear and confusion flashed through his eyes. Why did the black dragon suddenly become so cruel and ruthless? How did he offend it? The snowy clouds above the imperial palace gradually dispersed, revealing a faint sun that seemed like a fake. No matter how faint it was still a real sun. Sunlight was warm. Qin Changsheng took out a spare set of clothes from his scabbard. Because his hands and feet were frozen stiff, it took him a long time to change. He leaned against the pillar of the cold and cheerless palace. He closed his eyes and began to use the sunlight to recover his body temperature. The black goat slowly bent its front limbs and quietly crouched beside him. It then slowly closed its eyes. After a long time, when Qin Changsheng thought back to this day in the winter of that year, he would always feel a lot of sorrow and a faint sense of loss. At that time, he was still very young. He didn't understand many things and didn't notice many details. Those details were in the underground illuminated by the luminous pearls and by the pond illuminated by the sunlight. He thought that the black dragon was his senior. She was someone he could trust. She was someone he could easily talk to. In this statement, there were two absolute mistakes. The black dragon was obviously worthy of his trust, but she wasn't his senior. She felt it was very inconvenient for her to listen to the story between Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong, because she was a little girl. She had enough reason to be angry. In the dark and cold underground cavern, the little girl was eating. She didn't want to eat in the form of the black dragon in front of Chen Changsheng. That would be too clean. It wouldn't be beautiful. She was afraid of scaring him. But Chen Changsheng didn't understand. So she was angry. She heard that Chen Changsheng and Su Yurong met on the bridge of helplessness. She was also angry. In the past, she had always thought that it would be great if he never knew about this matter. In the end, she didn't know if it was because of the food or because she was angry, but her cheeks were slightly puffed up and her beautiful little face was filled with an unhappy expression. The cinnabar scar between her brows was filled with killing intent, and her dignified vertical pupils were now filled with grievance. Heartless man, if it wasn't because you also had a wound between your eyebrows on the bridge of helplessness, similar to me, I would have swallowed you in one bite. She held the blue lobster in her hands. She bit it like a sugar cane. At the same time, she thought fiercely and angrily. It didn't take long for the dozens of dishes that Chen Changsheng brought were all eaten by her. Under her black clothes, her stomach only slightly puffed up. Then she slowly lowered her head and sat in her own shadow. Actually, she didn't care what she ate. Whatever she ate, she would eat alone. She just didn't want to eat alone. She already ate alone for hundreds of years. She wanted to have someone to eat with. Or not eat. Chatting was fine. Not chatting was fine. Sitting was fine. Yesterday I said that I would only write one chapter today. But in the afternoon, I felt that my condition was good. I decided to write another chapter. But when I was locked in the little black room, I typed too many words. I still haven't finished it. I'm really sorry for making everyone wait. Chapter 548. Chen Changsheng leaned against the pillar and sat for a long time. He didn't open his eyes until the sun moved west and his body warmed up. The black goat walked in front of him and prepared to lead him away. Chen Changsheng looked at it and shook his head. I still have something to do. He continued to sit where he was and looked at the ice in the pond. He didn't say anything. No one knew what he was thinking. A hint of confusion appeared in the black goat's eyes that were as dark as the night. After a long time, Chen Changsheng stood up. He didn't leave the imperial palace to return to the Orthodox Academy. He went to another palace. He had come to this palace many times. Every time he came at night and talked to her through the window. This was the first time he entered the palace. Shuang Er entered the palace as expected. Her face paled when she saw him. She almost cried out in surprise. She calmed down a little. Her hand trembled as she poured tea and almost splashed it on him. Don't worry about it. I can say with certainty that she didn't want to take revenge on you. Su Yurong looked at him calmly. What happened? She was very clear that since she had made a request, then under normal circumstances, Chen Changsheng would definitely not take the risk of being discovered to see her. Chen Changsheng hesitated for a moment. I have a friend. He's been trapped in a place for a long time. I want to save him. Su Yurong was silent for a moment. She asked softly, and he might have done something wrong in the past, but he's been trapped for a long time. He's really pitiful. Chen Changsheng didn't know how to describe this matter. His words were a bit messy. But I have no way, so Su Yurong didn't wait for him to finish. She looked at his eyes and asked, Are you sure you want to do this? Chen Changsheng was surprised. He said seriously, Yes, I want to do this. Su Yurong looked at his eyes. Your friend is Zhu Sha? Chen Changsheng was confused. Zhu Sha. Su Yurong didn't expect it. You don't know her name? Qin Changsheng was surprised. You know who I'm talking about? Su Yurong said, Zhu Sha is Xiao Longnu's name. It's said that Master Wang Jisa gave it to her. Qin Changsheng looked at her in surprise. You know about the black dragon? Su Yurong nodded. Qin Changsheng was silent for a long time. The black dragon was a taboo in the Zhou royal palace, a secret that very few people knew of. But Su Yurong was the holy maiden and had been educated by the divine queen since childhood, so knowing of this matter wasn't hard to imagine. So, her name is Zhu Sha. So you don't know. Why was Lord Wang Jitsa the one who named her? Many years ago, the Golden Dragon tribe suddenly disappeared, and the noble Black Frost Dragon became the sole candidate for leader of the dragon tribe. However, the most powerful Black Frost Dragon of that generation had a soul that yearned for freedom and was unwilling to bear this responsibility. She stealthily came to the human world and then met Zhou Dufu, and then the noblest, strongest, and proudest Black Frost Dragon in 1,000 years perished just like that, becoming the garden of Zhou's Sunset Valley. Qin Changsheng was silent. Back in the garden of Zhou, he had seen with his own eyes the magnificent sight of that winding mountain range seemingly ablaze in the twilight. He had also sensed the abnormality of the black dragon's divine soul. But how could he have imagined that Sunset Valley was actually the body of a black frost dragon that had perished? And then, Zhu Sha was the daughter of that black frost dragon. For some reason, she left the Dragon Island of the Southern Sea and came alone to the human world. According to the records of the Li Palace and the Imperial Court, she said that when her father left, he forgot to bestow her a name, and the name that her clan elders gave her was too long, too ugly, and too hard to remember. She didn't like it, so she came to the human world. She wanted to find her father and ask him to give her a nicer sounding name. She just wanted a name? Yes, so in those years she was also called the Evil Dragon in search of a name. Evil Dragon? Yes, after she came ashore from the Southern Sea, she destroyed many fishing villages and towns, killed many people, and even almost caused chaos in the capital. You should know what happened afterwards. Lord Wang Jitsa planned to capture her, and then used that array to imprison her under New North Bridge. Qin Changsheng shook his head. That's not called planning. That's called deception. Su Yurong thought it over, then said, That's true. Qin Changsheng asked, Why did Wang Jitsa give her the name Zhu Sha? Su Yurong noticed that when he mentioned Wang Jitsa this time, he did not add the words Lord behind it, and she couldn't help but smile. No one knows why, but Lord Wang Jitsa must have a deeper meaning for this name. She glanced at him with a meaningful look. Qin Changsheng did not notice, asking then, How old is she now? If the lifespan of the dragon race is equal to that of humans, then she should be 1 or 2 years younger than us. Although I thought about it, it still felt a little strange. Back then, I always called her senior. Do you still want to rescue her? Yes. Even if she once committed monstrous crimes? You said that she's 1 or 2 years younger than us. So how old was she when she left the Southern Sea and came to the human world? 1 or 2 years. Qin Changsheng was quiet for a while, then said, I don't know what happened in those fishing villages and towns back then, nor do I have any intention of defending her, but she was just an infant back then. Even if she committed monstrous crimes, she has been imprisoned for several centuries, which should be enough. Su Yurong very seriously thought this over, then softly said, It really is enough. Qin Changsheng was very happy that she shared the same view on this matter, but no matter how slow-witted he was, he still knew that his request was somewhat inappropriate. Thus, he did not become elated, but instead became even more cautious. Even his voice became much softer. Can you help me? Su Yurong earnestly replied. Of course I can, but besides the Divine Empress and His Holiness, who else can undo the array left behind by Lord Wang Jitsa? Qin Changsheng recalled his conversation with his martial uncle the Pope in the Li Palace after returning to the capital from the Garden of Zhou and shook his head. Su Yurong understood and said, "Although I didn't see it with my own eyes, I can imagine that this array is probably not something we can undo at our current level. We can't just keep waiting like this. After many more years, New North Bridge won't become a real bridge. That's not necessarily true. Even a vast sea can become a mulberry field. The power of time is far more powerful than we imagine." The next chapter, 8 o'clock.